Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Marvel Comics, starting with the ability to replicate superhuman talents. Chapter 1. Small Town in Kansas. A huge billboard stands in front of the endless cornfield, with the words, "Welcome to the creamed corn capital of the world," written on it. Zooming out further, a helicopter flew crookedly over the cornfield, causing gusts of wind and waves to blow the corn stalks. This is a small helicopter, and there is a blond man sitting in the cabin, holding a newspaper and browsing information. As if being moved by the strong wind howling outside the window, the man put down the newspaper and looked at the seat behind him. Two blond boys were sitting in the cabin, one on the left and the other on the right. The cute younger boy was lowering his head and peeling an apple with a fruit knife, which was in sharp contrast to the nervous brother with his eyes closed next to him. When the man witnessed this scene, he became more and more dissatisfied with his eldest son's performance. Compared with his younger son, who was so smart and mature since he was a child, his eldest son was as timid as a real child. The man pursed his thin lips and scolded, "Lex, open your eyes." "But father, I'm afraid." Young Lex Luthor bit his lip. If you look carefully, the boy's lips have begun to tremble. Negative emotions from Lex Luthor +1. Congratulations, you have obtained 10,000 points of negative emotions from Lex Luthor, and have redeemed one copy of the talent. This voice sounded in the mind of the young child next to Lex. His name was Gino Luthor. He was a miserable college student in the 21st century who had graduated and was unemployed. He seemed to have been punished and cursed by the fairy godmother. He choked to death while drinking Coke, and his soul traveled to the DC universe, becoming the younger brother of the future bald and ruthless Emperor Lex Luthor. Who is Lex Luthor? One of the smartest human beings in DC, a super rich man who can compare with Bruce Wayne in terms of financial resources. He is as rich as a country and a technology tycoon. It is not an exaggeration to throw any of the advantages of a high-quality man into Luthor in the future. As the younger brother of future boss Lex Luthor, and a buff born into the rich second generation, Gino can be said to have been born at the end of his life. And Gino is a realistic person. He has neither genius-like wisdom nor extraordinary force. Salted fish should have the consciousness of salted fish. Therefore, Gino's plan at the beginning was very simple. He would spend his whole life eating and drinking until he could get away with it, which was called, lay down, for short. However, on the second day after he could speak, a plug-in named system appeared in his mind. To put it simply, Gino's system can collect the negative emotions of superheroes and supervillains in this universe to exchange for the ability to copy talents, but the upper limit of each person is 10,000 negative points. This gives Gino another possibility in his life, which is to copy the abilities of superheroes or supervillains in this world and become stronger. Brother Cheap is such a good guy. Gino felt a little emotional that all his 10,000 negative points were contributed by his brother. It's also thanks to the fact that the two of them grew up and started snatching Luthor's breasts. When being chased by a dog, he left Lex behind and ran away alone to wait for the afterlife scene of Brothers and Brothers. Gino spared his living expenses, and finally gained 10,000 points at the age of 5, possessing the ability to copy his talent for once. After coming back to his senses, Gino sighed and took his brother's little arm. "Okay, Lex, don't be afraid, I'm here." This small gesture gave Lex some courage. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Gino with a complicated expression. Growing up, he would always be compared with his younger brother by his father. For example, his younger brother cared about his parents, and even small things like bringing them breakfast would be used by his father as a weapon to attack Lex. Although his grades were better than Gino's, he couldn't bear the opponent's emotional intelligence to crush him. The only thing he could do well at home was that he was older than Gino. "Okay, stop arguing. Look at the town below. Isn't it beautiful?" Lionel was upset by the noise. Dad interrupted the argument between the two, and Lex held Gino's little hand with his backhand, looking fearfully at the field scenery outside the plane. Looking at the town's chimneys, beautiful asphalt roads, and vaguely visible tractors, these scenes that could not be seen in the city made Lex cheer for joy. "It's really beautiful." To be honest, this kind of view is not common in the metropolis. The roaring helicopter landed. Lex, who was wilting on the helicopter, immediately regained his energy and jumped out of the helicopter first. He raised his head and stared at Gino with provocative eyes as if he had won a victory. Look, I got off the helicopter before you. Children's comparison mood is always inexplicable. Gino ignored Lex's provocation and followed his father out of the helicopter. As soon as I got off the plane, several factory employees gathered around and asked Dad to process the documents. It's business again, so boring. Lex pouted, then grabbed Gino, who was standing in a daze, and pointed to the rice field not far away. Let's go over there and have a look. I think I saw a good one. Big bird. On a wooden stake at the entrance of the field, a bird with dark feathers tilted its head and looked at the two of them. Gino sighed. That's Raven, stupid Lex. Stop talking nonsense and come with me. Lex grabbed Gino's arm, and the two little crows chased the crow into the tall corn forest. Smelling the fragrance of the earth, Lex was extremely curious about everything in the country town. Wait, did you hear anything? Gino tilted his head. At this moment, the two of them were already walking deep in the corn forest. The tall stalks around them blocked their sight. Coupled with the dark environment, Lex couldn't help but swallowed. Gino, don't scare me. Gino sighed. Listen carefully, my foolish brother. Lex paused and listened. Help me, please, help me. A vague whisper echoed in their ears, like a strange invisible ghost. What happened? Lex squeezed Gino's arm again and swallowed nervously. The sound seems to be coming from over there. Gino looked up to the right and stepped towards the direction of the sound. Wait a minute, don't run around. What if there is really a ghost? Lex looked at Gino, who was leaving. Worried about his little brother's safety, he gritted his teeth and chased after Gino. The two walked through the wet soil and pushed aside corn stalks, and finally found the source of the sound. That's a person, Lex asked in surprise. In the corn forest, a naked young man was tied to a wooden cross with a rope. A big S was painted on his chest with red paint. His black hair was wet with sweat and stuck to both sides of his cheeks. Seeing the two of them, the man's eyes lit up and he said, Please, help me. Why are you tied to the cross? Let's put him down. The two spoke in tandem. Lex quickly grabbed Gino and said, Wait a minute, Gino, maybe this guy is some kind of bad guy who is tied to this cross. Gino moved slightly, then followed Lex and stood in front of the man. He put away the knife in his hand, stared at the young man and said, Tell me, why are you tied here? The man hung his head weakly and said in a weak and low voice, This is bullying. Campus bullying at the local school's high school graduation prom. They will select the guy who is least popular in the school to take on the role of scarecrow. A whole day and night. When he said the last sentence, the man's tone already had a hint of gritted teeth. A school bullying. Gino sighed a little. The man in front of him was thin and elegant, and he completely fit the image of a nerd who was bullied in an American high school. Let's put him down. Just as Gino was about to cut the rope, he heard Lex shouting in panic, Wait. Look at the sky. Gino looked up and saw several hot streams of light streaking across the sky in the blue sky, flying towards the town with long tails. One of them is approaching the three of them at an extremely fast speed. The face of the nerdy young man changed drastically, and he saw the meteorite suddenly hit the field not far from everyone. Boom! The huge impact caused by the meteorite falling to the ground caused the soil to surge, mixed with terrifying air waves that spread out in all directions centered on the impact point of the meteorite. Lex pushed down Gino first and pressed him under him. Lie down. Gino. The next second, air waves mixed with mud suddenly fell on Lex's back, and countless mud buried their bodies. At the same time, countless meteorites fell across the town. Some meteorites fell into the streets, setting off a series of explosions and screams, smashing cars and taking away the lives of innocent people. Others fell into residences' homes, killing a family of 3 on the spot. For the small town, today is a terrible disaster. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the setting sun poured into the room through the glass and hit the white hospital bed. Gino's eyes moved slightly, and there was a strong smell of disinfectant in the air. The smell immediately made people know where they were. He is in the hospital. Gino felt relieved. Fortunately, he was saved. However, concern for Lex arose in my heart. Although Lex is always criticized for being timid and naive, the two grew up together, and their family relationship cannot be faked. Gino raised his eyelids with difficulty, glanced around, and soon saw the unconscious Lex on the bed beside him. After glancing at Cheap Brother's electrocardiogram and confirming that he was alive, Gino breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the person was not dead, even if he was in a vegetative state, he could save Cheap Brother as long as he gave himself time. However, this feeling of having no power and being at the mercy of natural disasters is really terrible. Gino slowly raised his head, staring at the setting sun in the distance with a faint expression. With a thought in his mind, there was an extra card in his hand that only he could see. Being familiar with the DC superhero origin story in his previous life, Gino certainly knew where these meteors and meteorites came from. Maybe he couldn't be sure when he first came to this town, but the violent meteorite rain that affected the entire town made Kilo sure that the future god on Earth, Clark Kent, had finally landed in this town. What an interesting irony that the arrival of a god among men is accompanied by destruction. Gino got out of bed and came to the cheap man in a hospital gown, while their savior was also lying on the bed next door. Gino rubbed Lex's cheek, and the next second, the cheap guy suddenly woke up. Hoo-ho, where are we? Lex opened his eyes. He was breathing rapidly and looking at the surrounding environment with a horrified look on his face. It was obvious that he had not yet recovered from the meteorite explosion. Gino reluctantly slapped Lex on the cheek. Wake up, Lex, we are in the hospital, we have been rescued. After Gino's explanation, Lex realized that he was lying on the hospital bed. Lex muttered, then glanced at the ward and said, "Where's Dad?" Gino shrugged. "Go and do business." Their father, Lionel Luthor, was a shrewd businessman, an extremely wealthy man, and one of the most successful businessmen in free America. Anyone who met him had to be courteous to him. He gave almost all his money to him. Time is spent creating wealth, and naturally alienated from family companionship. Haha, he is never satisfied with his wealth, he always wants more, like a greedy vampire. A trace of anger appeared on Lex's face. With his two sons lying in the hospital, he was still thinking about business. Gino, are you feeling uncomfortable? Lex decided not to think about Lionel anymore, so he looked at Gino and asked. Gino waved his hand. I'm fine. But the guy tied to the cross is unlucky. Gino pointed to the clinically comatose young man. Even though he was wearing a hospital gown, you could still see the S-shaped red paint on the guy's chest. Lex sneered. Ha, if it weren't for him, maybe the meteorite wouldn't have affected us. Just when Lex was about to speak, the door opened and his father, Lionel, walked into the ward. When he saw Gino and Lex waking up, the man was obviously relieved. Oh, thank God, you are okay. Yes, Dad, except for the moment we opened our eyes and found that you were not around, we were still very happy. Lex commented with a sneer. Lex was very unfazed by the cheap dad who loved money more than his son. Listening to Lex's weird words, Lionel frowned and reprimanded, Hey, don't blame me. I plan to build a fertilizer processing plant here, which will bring us the Luthor family a lot of profits. So how did things go? Father, Kilo quickly interrupted the conversation. If Lex was allowed to say a few more words, the angry cheap daddy would beat up the cheap guy. Hearing Kilo's inquiry, the man rubbed his forehead in annoyance and complained, Humph, things went smoothly, except for the fact that a farmer outside the town refused to agree to sell their land. That's why I'm here. I'm going to offer them a price they can't refuse and let them accept it. Kilo became interested and asked curiously, which couple is so stubborn? Could it be the Kent family? Cheap Daddy thought about it for a while, frowned and said, they seem to be called Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent. Gino was not surprised when he heard these two names. Only Jonathan and his wife could reject the huge acquisition proposal. The black car sped along the country road, and ambulances and fire trucks passed by from time to time. The town that was baptized by the meteorite was full of devastation and disaster. Today was destined to be a disastrous day for the town. Gino was sitting in the back seat of the car. Through the window, he could see many families driving away from the town. The car drove through the field where Gino had been before, and the towering corn forest was flattened by the impact of the meteorite explosion. Even if the town is in chaos now, it can't stop Lionel's heart of making money. Seriously, why don't we stay in the hospital instead of following this vampire? Lex complained in Gino's ear, showing a filial son's temperament since he was a child. Just a few minutes ago, when Lionel said the names of the Kents, Gino had insisted on going with them. Come on, he bought you the expensive suit you're wearing. Gino pointed at Lex's suit, which made the other person fall into depression again and make a face. "Boss, we're here." The driver parked the car firmly and looked out the window, which was a slightly old farm. Who would live in a place like this? Lex looked at the farm that was about to collapse with disdain. "So this is why I told you to work hard." Lionel sneered, opened the door and walked out of the car. Gino silently opened the door and got out of the car. "Oh my gosh, I got a puddle of poop in my shoe." As soon as he got out of the car, Lex was unlucky enough to step on a puddle of bird droppings on the edge of the road. Gino walked past Lex and taunted with a smile. "Good luck as always, Lex. Set your sights on this farm." The entrance door was chained, making it look as if the owner of the house was not at home. Our trip was in vain. This wasted my time. Lionel, a shrewd businessman, was a little upset. He smelled the smell of poultry feces in the air. The man couldn't help turning his head and scolding Lex. "Lex, throw away those shoes. Stop rubbing them around." Lex was a little embarrassed and took off his shoes and threw them in the field, and was scolded by his father in front of Gino. This made Lex even more embarrassed and ran to the car with a dark face. "Father, we seem to have arrived at that family." Gino pointed out something, standing on tiptoes and pointing at the two figures in the distance. They were a young couple. The man's face was full of dullness and simplicity. He was an honest man who could be recognized from the crowd at a glance, giving people a sense of calmness and reliability. At this moment, his wife seemed to be saying something next to the man. The man nodded with a smile, but it could be seen from the worried eyes that he was not in a good mood. As for his wife, she had beautiful blonde hair. Her arms were tightly hugging the coat on her chest. There seemed to be something hidden inside, which made her look at the coat on her chest frequently. "Thank God, it's finally here." Lionel breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards the couple. He blocked their way, took out the account book from his pocket and said, "Hey, you two, I am Lionel Luther, chairman of Luther Group." Lionel waved the banknote towards Jonathan and said, "Let's get right to the point. How much do you want, and I'll give you a price you can't refuse for this farm." "Wait, Martha and I." Before Jonathan could finish his words, he was pulled aside by Lionel to talk about the price. In Lionel's view, there was nothing that money couldn't buy. Martha, a young wife, looked worriedly at Lionel, who was negotiating with her husband. In her opinion, the Luther Group was a behemoth that they could not afford to offend. With her husband's stubborn character, it was very likely that he would have an affair with Lionel. Conflict. Just when Martha was worried, she felt her trouser leg being gently tugged. The woman lowered her head and saw a sculpted little boy looking at her with his head raised. "Beautiful sister, what are you holding in your arms?" The cunning Gino made full use of his cute appearance and eloquent mouth to ask Martha. Looking at the cute boy, Martha looked down at the boy she picked up on the roadside, smiled and said, "It's my adopted child." "Baby." Gino showed an eager expression. "Can I see him?" This, Martha wanted to refuse, but when she met Gino's pitiful expression, Martha sighed, knelt down and showed the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes to Gino. "He's so cute." Gino stared at the baby wrapped in the coat. He had short black hair and a peaceful sleeping face. The baby's pink and white skin can inspire a woman's maternal nature. It's no wonder that Martha insisted on keeping the young baby. "Clark, can I touch his hair?" Martha pursed her lips. "Okay, but be gentle, he is sleeping." "Of course." Gino nodded seriously and pointed to the black car behind him. "I often coax my brother to sleep. I have experience in this area." Martha raised her head and glanced at Lex, who had a dark face in the car and didn't know that he was a younger brother. Then she felt relieved and handed the swaddle in her hand to Gino. Gino stared at Clark, and then stretched out two fingers. Invisible to outsiders, there was a card emitting golden light between his two fingers. The finger slowly stretched out towards Clark, and the moment the index finger touched Clark's forehead, the golden card turned into a stream of gold powder and sprinkled on the young Clark's body. "Contact Clark Kent and have copied the talent." The cold voice of the system sounded in my mind. Gino was a little confused. To be honest, he didn't feel any strange feeling. It was as calm and unchanged as breathing. Except for the setting sun hitting my body, which makes my body feel indescribably comfortable. "Isn't this system fake?" Gino looked strange. He wanted to know if the system had a complaint channel. He wanted to complain to the system. While Gino was thinking, not far away, Jonathan and Lionel also had a fierce quarrel. "I'm sorry, Lionel, I won't sell my farm for any money. I love it here, it's an integral part of who I am." Lionel turned his head angrily. "It's up to you, you stubborn idiot." "Gino, let's go." Gino glanced at the furious father, smiled apologetically at the worried Martha, then turned around and left with Lionel. Sitting in the car, Lionel was obviously furious, and he complained wildly about Jonathan's stubbornness and stupidity along the way. Gino was also a little unhappy. Touching the knife in his pocket, he was a little unsure whether he had obtained superhuman abilities. If he had really succeeded, why was there no change? Gino subconsciously clenched his fists. Click. A crisp sound rang in his pocket. Gino glanced down at his pocket and found that the sharp fruit knife in his palm had long been twisted into a ball of twisted iron and scrapped. 13 years later, in a small town in Kansas, billboards that were originally destroyed by meteorites were once again erected in the woods, with the familiar words, "Buttered Corn Capital of the World," written on them. Buzz. A roaring sports car skitters past the billboard, kicking up clouds of dust and drifting beautifully through the bend. The roaring engine drove the sports car speeding through the fields, crossing the creek, and finally stopped suddenly in front of a quaint castle that occupied a large area. 2 young men stepped out of the sports car. The young man driving the car had blonde hair, a handsome and angular face, brown-black eyes like eagle eyes, a high nose and slightly thin lips. This is undoubtedly a handsome and perfect man, and the expensive suit makes him look even more handsome. He is like a perfectly handsome prince in the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, the princess sitting in the passenger seat is a bald young man. The other one with a smooth and round bald head is Lex Luthor. Well, although he avoided the baldness caused by the meteorite impact, in more than 10 years of study, Luthor, who was too smart, still lost all his hair and became a bald young man. Gino tilted his head and looked at the castle in front of him with some emotion. "Wow, it really looks like a medieval castle as you said, exuding the aura of history." Lex sneered. "You want to say it's old, right?" Lex waved to the butler who was guarding the door, and soon someone came and drove away the car. The old butler opened the main door of the castle, with a decent smile on his face, and welcomed the owner of the castle to the castle. The two of them walked along the tree-lined path, smelling the fresh air in the countryside, which made people feel much better. Lex looked at his brother with rich blonde hair and said angrily, "Congratulations, you were exiled to a small town by that vampire with me." Gino shrugged. "I just hope this ghost castle isn't haunted." Lex glanced at Gino's strong figure. Others may not know it, but he knew the terrifying power contained in his brother's body. If the two of them really encountered a monster like a zombie, it would only be the latter who would run away. "Come with me, I've prepared a gift for you." Lex took Gino to the lawn behind the castle. There was a silver-white sports car parked on the large grass. Lex knocked on the body. The Bugatti AB 110 Super Sport uses a quad-turbo V12 supercharged engine and can reach a speed of 216 miles per hour. Congratulations on officially entering high school life. With that said, Lex threw the key in his hand to Gino. "Come, Lex." Gino reluctantly took the key. "You don't really agree with Dad's stupid idea of letting me go to high school or something, do you? Education is very important. Also, you should call me brother." Lex grinned and looked at Gino's deflated expression. Not to mention how happy he was in his heart, the man snapped his fingers. "Anyway, if you choose to resist going to school, I will truthfully tell your mother these things. You don't want her to fly from the metropolis to come to you, right?" Listening to Lex's words, Gino suddenly pictured his mother using a gentle tone while reaching out to pinch his ears. The young man reluctantly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Okay, I will go to school." Gino has a very open view on life. Since you can't resist, then accept him. Moreover, if you remember correctly, the famous Mr. Clark seems to have also gone to high school in the small town. Clark's high school career was very troubled, and he didn't have to worry about negative points when he went to school. During these 13 years, he also figured out according to the rules of the system, the upper limit of points obtained by a superhero or supervillain is 10,000 points. Therefore, if you want to use points to exchange for more items, you need to constantly exchange them with new heroes and villains. Lex was going to inspect the family's factory in a small town next. Before leaving, he told Gino to report to school today. Oh, high school life. Gino looked up at the blue sky, and subconsciously thought of the miserable high school career in his previous life of 1996. Even if he tried his best, he could only get a miserable college diploma under the wave of involution. But now, everything has passed. Gino looked at the sun with a smile. The gentle sunlight hitting his body constantly nourished Gino's body. He could feel his blood boiling and roaring. The terrifying power contained in this body was enough to make the world tremble. Gino slowly raised his powerful arm that seemed to be made of steel alloy, and then opened his palm. Hold gently. Bang! The terrifying power caused the air in his palm to explode with a sonic explosion, truly detonating the air. In this life, I will never live such a useless life. I will embrace all the beautiful things in life. With an indifferent expression, Gino took off his black suit, revealing his white shirt. He opened the car door and got in. High school life. The young man smiled indifferently and said slowly amidst the roar of the sports car, "I'm coming." The Bugatti sports car roared out of the manor and headed towards the town. While driving, with wind and waves blowing on both sides of the car, Gino thought about his abilities. 13 years have passed since he copied Clark's talent. He found that the talent copied by the system was the same as that of young Clark, which was gradually awakened over time, such as the steel body and super strength that could easily break a knife at the beginning. I don't know when I can awaken my heat vision. Gino turned the steering wheel, and the sports car turned onto a more open country dirt road. After turning a corner again, a yellow-brown school bus appeared in front of the car window, and Gino realized that his route to school happened to coincide with the school bus. Wait, that farm. Gino frowned and looked at the farm in the distance. Isn't this the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan? It was here that I copied Clark's talent when I was a child. Just as he was thinking this, Gino saw a figure walking out of the red house on the farm. The figure was carrying a red canvas bag, had rich black curly hair, and a tall and powerful figure. However, the old jacket he was wearing looked a bit rustic. The other party stared at the school bus in the distance, lowering his head in a little loss. Reap Clark Kent's negative emotion +1. Here comes the big gift package. Gino glanced at Clark, who was standing at the gate of the farm. The next second, the young man slammed on the brakes, and the sports car stopped in front of Clark with a beautiful flick. Gino coquettishly took off the sunglasses on his face, lowered his head and stared at the young boy and said, "Hey, friend, do you want a ride?" Clark looked in surprise as the cool silver sports car and the cool blonde young man suddenly appeared in front of him. "Hello, but I don't think I need it." He was going to say that he ran to school, but before Clark could finish his words, he was interrupted by Gino. The young man shrugged with an exaggerated expression. "Please, you are also a high school student, right?" "I just came to this school today and am preparing to register." Gino pointed to the school bus that was gradually disappearing. "Do you want to walk to the school a few kilometers away?" This is the first time Clark meets Gino. The young man sitting in the driver's seat put one hand on the door of the sports car and the other on the steering wheel. His long fingers tapped the steering wheel rhythmically to the music in the car. The young man said to Clark with a strong attitude, "There is no time to waste, get in the car and follow me, you stupid guy. Let's catch up with the school bus in front of us." Clark sighed. He originally planned to use super speed to take a shortcut to run to school, but this sports car boy suddenly broke into his life like a visitor from outside. The desire for the limelight during the rebellious period was combined with the influence of Gino's words. Somehow, Clark stretched out his arm to open the door and sat in the passenger seat of the sports car. Who can refuse to experience the temptation of a sports car? Not to mention the innocent big boy Clark. "That's right, big boy, fasten your seat belt." Gino looked forward, twisted his neck and said coolly, "The next step will be very soon. Press the clutch and engage the gear, then release the brake and tap the accelerator." The originally calm sports car suddenly emits an ear-splitting roar, and instantly turns into an afterimage and flutters towards the road ahead. The wheels run over the dirt, and the Bugatti sports car shoots out like an arrow from a string, chasing towards the school bus. Amidst the strong wind, Gino operated the steering wheel with one hand, and the sports car swung through the curve in a beautiful arc, shouting to Clark, "This is cool, isn't it?" The wind roared in his ears, and the roar of the sports car ignited the man's blood. Even Clark, who had been restraining himself, felt the urge to cheer loudly at this moment. Although he could easily catch up with the sports car with his own speed, sitting in the sports car was a different experience. He nodded heavily and responded loudly, "Your driving skills are so good." "Ah, this is nothing." Gino's expression was calm. As the sports car continued to accelerate, the two of them could already see the school bus. Gino grinned and said harshly, "Let's make the game more exciting." Having said that, Gino stepped on the accelerator again, and the sports car roared straight towards the school bus's taillights. "Wait, what are you doing?" Clark's expression changed drastically as he saw the sports car rushing towards the school bus at extremely fast speeds. 300 meters, 200 meters. The engine roared, the car body roared, and the tires made a rustling sound as they rolled over the dirt. The car is about to crash. Clark held the car door tightly. He wanted to jump out to prevent this tragedy. And Gino's ears were constantly ringing with negative emotions from Clark. Just when Clark was about to jump out of the sports car to stop the impending car accident, Gino suddenly turned the steering wheel and pulled the handbrake. The smoothly speeding sports car suddenly swerved, and the huge inertia almost threw Clark away. The sunny boy couldn't help but hold on to the car door, while nervously watching the sports car pass the school bus with a professional, drainage ditch bend, move. The tires squeal. The sports car passed the school bus with a brisk, fast and elegant drift and easily completed the overtaking. This is due to the fact that Lionel invited the world's top racing drivers to train Gino when he was very young. His driving skills are great. On the school bus, the driver's face turned green with anger. He stared at the arrogant sports car passing the school bus he was driving, and was overtaken by the other party with a drifting movement. For a man, this was a silent provocation. The uncle driver was very angry and thought that if he had been there 20 years in the morning, he would be able to do racing and drifting. How can it be the younger generation's turn to be so arrogant? The uncle driver muttered and complained. Today's young people really don't respect martial ethics and have no idea of respecting the elderly and caring for the young. The students in the car also exclaimed, "But for these guys with strong hormones, this behavior is simply cool." In the back seat of the school bus, a black boy rubbed his eyes in disbelief, looked at the co-pilot of the sports car, and said in a strange tone, "Wait a minute, Chloe, that co-pilot seems to be Clark." "What?" The girl with short blonde hair bit her lip. Her name was Chloe, and she was one of Clark's few friends on campus. She looked at the familiar brown jacket and red school bag in surprise, rolled her eyes at the black man Pete next to her, and said, "That doesn't look like that, or it's Clark." "Shet." The black boy pouted his thick lips and said with complicated emotions, "I never knew that our farm boy actually has a friend who drives a sports car. We have never seen that guy in school." The girl flipped her short blonde hair and said, "That man seems very young. Maybe he is a transfer student or something. Do you think I have a chance to invite him to the prom?" Peter shrugged and said, "I didn't see that guy's face clearly, but if he's handsome, maybe you don't have a chance. Those enthusiastic cheerleading girls are going to eat him alive. Not your turn, Chloe, we're the school freak trio, aren't we? It doesn't matter if he has money, if he is tall and handsome, believe me, he will easily replace Whitney as the school's well-deserved campus hero. He can invite any cute girl to his house to play poker." Quote, "Because no girl would reject such a perfect man." Little Black Pete rubbed his cheek and said, "If I were a woman, I would also love him to death." Outside the school bus, the sports car on the other side resumed driving smoothly. Gino raised his right hand and gave a thumbs up to the school bus behind him, then stepped on the accelerator and drove away amidst the driver's angry scolding. "Oh my God, you're crazy." The frightened Clark pursed his lips, which was a sign of his anger. "Your behavior is completely irresponsible for life, and it is also a disregard for your own life." Clark kept preaching, and while Gino was harvesting Clark's negative emotions, he pretended to listen attentively, with a look of approval on his face. He nodded and said, "You were right, I won't do it next time." Hearing Gino's words, Clark couldn't help but be slightly startled and looked at Gino with some suspicion. And when the boy took off his sunglasses and revealed his sincere eyes, Clark was silent for a moment and decided to believe Gino. Maybe this new classmate was just spoiled by his family because he was too rich. Kind-hearted Clark always likes to believe in others. Here we are. While Clark was thinking, the sports car slowly parked in a parking space outside the campus. Gino pulled out the car key, patted Clark on the shoulder, took out a box of chewing gum from his pocket, and gestured to Clark to take one. "Let me meet you, my name is Gino Luther." Clark politely took away a stick of chewing gum, and then stared at Gino with some surprise. "Luther? The Luther family of the small-town chemical plant." "Ah, yes, if there is no second Luther family in this town, I will be the Luther." Gino raised his eyebrows and winked at Clark, extending his right hand to show friendship. Clark pursed his lips. Although Gino's behavior just now was a bit crazy, fortunately it did not cause a big disaster. After thinking about it, he still took the right hand handed over by Gino and said seriously, "My name is Clark Kent." The school bus soon stopped at the gate of the campus. The students got off the school bus one after another. The eyes of many students were immediately attracted by the silver-white Bugatti sports car. After all, among the crowd of vintage pickup trucks, Gino's Bugatti sports car seems to stand out from the crowd and attracts the attention of high school students. What makes many girls even more crazy is the figure standing next to the sports car. Long blonde hair, tall figure and handsome appearance. Gino's slender fingers rested on shy Clark's shoulders, his irreverent smile and unbridled movements, as well as the looming outline of perfect abdominal muscles under the white shirt, all made many restless girls and adolescents excited, and they could only feel their heartbeats and blood pressure increasing. Soaring. Years of sunshine and wealth have created Gino's perfect temperament, handsome appearance, and flamboyant self-confidence, which is undoubtedly a walking weapon to kill girls. Seeing many students casting their gazes in this direction, Clark, who had never received such huge attention, was at a loss for a moment. He was held around the neck by Gino like a puppet on strings and walked towards the campus. Isn't this a good feeling? Clark and Gino walked into the campus with their arms around each other and their heads lowered. At the same time, they did not forget to peek out of the corner of their eyes at the goddess Lana Blue, who was also looking at them. Although this new classmate is a little arrogant in his actions, on American campuses, boys who can hang out with cool kids will also be recognized as cool kids. This feeling of being noticed greatly satisfies young Clark's restless heart. Self-esteem. He feels great now. On the other side of the duo, Peter glanced at his best friend Chloe and said with some regret, "It seems that I guessed the worst plan. This sports car boy is so handsome." Chloe sighed, took out a $5 knife from her pocket and handed it to little Nico. "You won the bet." She has now seen many girls who think they are beautiful, purposely passing by Gino and Clark in groups, deliberately laughing to attract the attention of the handsome blonde man. "It seems I have no chance." Chloe sighed, but quickly adjusted herself, and asked her companion Pete enthusiastically, "Do you think if you invite him to join the campus daily club, will it attract more people?" "Talent joining." Peter glanced at Chloe. "How could you ask such a stupid question? This new classmate has become a popular star in the school, and the girls' eyes are almost wet when they look at him. What you need to think about is how to get this blonde boy to join your newspaper." Chloe nodded in agreement. Looking at the conversation with Gino, the somewhat shy Clark said, "Maybe we can ask Clark for help. The blonde boy seems to have a good attitude towards Clark." So, Chloe took action immediately. "Hey, Clark." The girl ran to the two older boys and blocked the way. She glanced at Gino and said, "I didn't expect you to make good friends so quickly." Clark rubbed his nose in embarrassment. "Hey, Chloe, this is Gino Luther." Gino interrupted Clark's introduction and smiled at the girl. The two of them were considered acquaintances. "It turns out to be the Luther family." Chloe said, "It should be like this expression. If it was the Luther family, then it wouldn't be strange to be able to drive a sports car." "Oh, shit, man, you have a Bugatti sports car." Little Nico Pete also ran over and greeted Gino. "You are the new freshman, right?" Gino smiled and nodded. "Yes, my brother and I came to the small town from the metropolis. I have to say, your place is much better than the big city. The air quality in that place is terrible." In just one sentence, Gino narrowed the distance between him and Clark by praising their hometown. All three of them had proud expressions on their faces. While a few people were talking, Lana Blue, not far away, was also watching what was going on here. The girl's eyes fell on Gino's face, and she always felt that she had seen this guy somewhere when she was a child. Lana, honey, what are you looking at? Lana's boyfriend, the captain of the football team, a tall blonde young man named Whitney, noticed his girlfriend's gaze. He followed his girlfriend's gaze and saw Gino with a wicked smile on his face, chatting and laughing with the trio of campus geeks. Suddenly, the jealousy in Whitney's heart was overturned. It seemed that his girlfriend was attracted by Gino. Ha, this guy is the sports car kid from the morning. He has become a famous figure on campus. Whitney said in her girlfriend's ear in a sinister tone, that lunatic almost hit our school bus. Whitney frantically fanned the flames in her girlfriend's ears, trying to lower her favorability towards Gino. Oh, yes, that guy is a little crazy. Lana came back to her senses and smiled gently at her boyfriend. I just think that the transfer student looks a bit like a boy I met when I was a child, but maybe I made a mistake. Let's go, it's time to go to class. Lana picked up her school bag and walked towards the classroom. With a gloomy expression, Whitney glanced at her girlfriend who turned to leave, and then glanced at Gino, who was looking arrogantly. The other party was also staring at the back of his girlfriend Lana as she left. The look of her arrogant attitude immediately reminded Whitney of there are many INETER plots. Before entering the campus, he heard many classmates talking about this boy, saying that this guy was expected to become the new school president. As the former school president, Whitney was naturally unhappy with these words. Coupled with the previous misunderstanding, Whitney only felt a fire burning in her chest. Suddenly thinking of the project candidates finalized by the football team, Whitney's lips curved into a sneer. Just wait, blonde boy. That list should be changed. Gino didn't know that he was on the blacklist of his former school boss. His eyes were locked on Lana, who walked into the classroom. Ever since he first stepped into the campus, he had felt an uncomfortable feeling from the girl, like a fish out of water or a traveler with a cold, which made Gino feel uncomfortable. I have to figure out what's weird about this girl. Gino secretly remembered it in his heart. Glancing down at the time on his watch, Gino said goodbye to the three of them. Okay, guys, I'll report to the principal's office first. We'll see you after class. Gino said goodbye to the three of them, turned around and walked towards the teaching building. Gino came to the principal's office. The vice principal of the small-town high school was a middle-aged Asian man. There was a small golden plaque on his desk with, Mr. Guan, written on it. Hello, Mr. Gino Luther. The middle-aged Asian man stood up with a smile to greet Gino. Welcome to our high school. Gino smiled and nodded. I'm also looking forward to the rest of my high school life. Jingle bell. The bell echoed throughout the campus. In the corridor, several long-legged girls stopped Gino. The leading white girl deliberately rolled up her shirt, exposing her flat belly, and stared at Gino with her head tilted. So, do you have time tonight? The other two wingmen followed suit and said, we have a great party. Yes, I hope you can participate. Gino looked at the young girls in front of him, smiled, leaned down, pinched the cheek of the leading girl, and chuckled. I'm sorry, my brother and I have to clean up the castle tonight, so we may not have time. But when the castle is clean, I will invite everyone to the castle dance. The three girls were stunned for a moment, then screamed, you mean Luther Castle? Is that your family's? Oh my god. The girls are obviously shocked that Gino owns an old castle. He's really good at flirting with girls. In the corridor, Chloe said with emotion, with that face, no girl will reject him. If it were you, it would be harassment. Peter on the side said with some excitement, I just care about the party he mentioned. If he invites me, I will have a big meal at the dance. What are you talking about? Clark suddenly appeared behind the two of them. Oh, my god. Chloe and Peter were both startled by Clark's sudden appearance. The two turned around and stared at Clark angrily. What the hell? Before the two of them could recover, Gino's voice suddenly sounded from behind them. This was a second fright, and Peter showed an expression that was uglier than crying. Why do you all like to appear behind others silently? Chloe quickly came to her senses and signaled Clark to take action with her eyes. Meeting Chloe's gaze, Clark was slightly startled, but then he thought of the girls' arrangements for him in class, so Clark scratched his head and said, Gino, are you interested in joining the campus newspaper? Campus newspaper. Gino frowned. After looking at Clark, the young man grinned. Of course, why not? I'm also quite interested in the campus newspaper. Of course, this is all bullshit. Gino, who has been reborn, is only interested in becoming stronger and finding girls who are difficult to seduce. The reason why he agreed to join the newspaper is to get more points from Clark. Chloe on the side suddenly beamed with joy. She didn't expect this blonde transfer student to agree so readily, and even Peter didn't expect it. Chloe cleared her throat and was about to say something to Gino when the cell phone in the boy's pocket rang. Sorry, let me answer the phone. Gino raised his eyebrows, showed an apologetic expression to several people, and then walked away to pick up the phone. There was an unfamiliar number on the screen. When Gino answered the call, he heard a slightly green male voice. Hello, Gino Luther. Jerome. Gino's super memory immediately made him recognize the voice on the other end of the phone. He had seen the other person in the corn forest before. But at that time, I was planning to save the unlucky guy, but the meteorite struck, and in the end I had no choice but to let Jerome hang on the cross to face the meteorite bombardment. After that, this unlucky guy became a vegetative and lay in a coma in the hospital for more than 10 years. Haha, I'm glad you still remember me. But now we should settle the score. The voice on the other end of the phone was cold. Especially when I was hit by a meteorite, you were indifferent. When the words reached the second half, Jerome's voice already had a hint of gritted teeth. Gino frowned. Are you blaming me? I wanted to save you at that time, but I also had to consider the situation. Gino's voice gradually turned colder. I don't think I should sacrifice myself to save you. Gino has seen a lot of people like Jerome, a typical moral kidnapper. As long as you don't help me, it's your fault. The other party didn't even consider that the medical expenses during his coma were advanced by the Luther family. Haha, believe me, you will regret it. Jerome threatened, then hung up the phone. Gino took back his cell phone thoughtfully, and his sensitive hearing detected the whistling wind behind his head. Gino dodged it without looking back. A fist rubbed his clothes and hit the corridor wall hard. What are you doing? Gino stared expressionlessly at his attacker, a blond young man wearing a red and white rugby uniform. The opponent's face was gloomy at the moment, like a big angry bear. Gino Luther. Whitney silently retracted his arm. Although his right fist was in terrible pain, he still put on a tough guy posture and provoked Gino with his eyes. I need you to help me with something. Go be the annual scarecrow. Gino crossed his hands and said, I'm in a bad mood right now. Let's leave before I change my mind. An ordinary person without kryptonite plans to kidnap himself with superhuman abilities and become a scarecrow. This incident is as ridiculous as Lex being scolded by his father for rubbing chicken shit when he was little. Stop acting like a young man from a wealthy family. Whitney sneered and stepped forward to approach Gino. At this moment, a large number of onlookers had gathered in the corridor. Hey, what are you doing? Clark came to Gino, trying to stop the conflict. Whitney, the football captain with strong chest muscles straightened up, glanced at Clark and said, It has nothing to do with you, farm boy. He set his eyes on Gino and shouted, I'm going to teach you a lesson. After the words fell, the man clenched his fist and punched Gino's beautiful cheek with a straight fist. The crowd erupted in exclamations, and many students could already predict that Gino's nose would be bruised and his face would be swollen. Clark subconsciously took a step forward. He planned to stand in front of Gino and block the punch for him. However, to Clark's surprise, in an instant, Gino was even faster than him. He just grabbed Whitney's arm in an instant and then gently broke it. Gotcha. There was a clear sound of bone cracking, and Whitney's forearm was fractured. The broken bones pierced the flesh and exposed the air, which looked particularly terrifying. But all this happens in a short moment, and can even be calculated in milliseconds. Clark looked at Gino with wide eyes. His face was full of shock, surprise, and anger. He was shocked and surprised because this was the first time in so many years that he had encountered a superhuman like himself, but he was angry because of Gino's cruelty to Whitney. The other party actually broke Whitney's arm alive. Before Clark could come back to his senses, Whitney's screams were heard in the corridor the next second. Oh, shit. My hand. He looked at his twisted arm in horror. The severe pain made the man clenched his arm and rolled on the ground. Blood spurted out from the wound on his arm and spilled onto the floor. The crowd of people watching were also shocked by this horrific scene, and they started talking about it. What happened? Oh my God, what's going on? In the eyes of the onlookers, Whitney just punched Gino suddenly, and then his arm broke without warning, spurting out a large amount of blood. Oh my God, isn't Gino a devil? A student who believed in ghosts and gods sounded horrified. But soon a girl retorted, then why can't it be God's blessing? He is so handsome, like an angel. God must not be able to stand Whitney's behavior and impose divine punishment. The crowd had different opinions and talked about Gino's performance. This new transfer student once again brought a new topic to everyone after experiencing the drag racing incident. But at this moment, a figure pushed through the crowd and broke into the fight scene. Lana looked shocked at the blood everywhere and her boyfriend's broken arm, and shouted in a panic, "Quick, call an ambulance." "Did you hurt him?" Lana raised her head and glared at Gino. At the same time as the girl appeared, both Gino and Clark's faces turned extremely pale almost at the same time. Plop. Clark was the first to faint and faint. Shet. Clark fainted and collapsed. Chloe and Peter rushed to Clark, trying to lift the unconscious Clark, and said urgently, "We need an ambulance." Gino glanced at the green necklace around the girl's neck. He moved his legs quickly to distance himself from Lana, and then the feeling of weakness all over his body left him. "It's kryptonite," Gino cursed in his heart. Superman's abilities are awakened with age. In addition to possessing a body of steel, super strength and super speed, he has not yet awakened supervision and clairvoyance ability at this stage. It was not until today that he could see Lana Blue clearly. "There is a green kryptonite hanging around his neck." "I didn't do anything, ma'am." Although his face was pale, Gino still managed to smile gracefully. "Maybe you should ask everyone what your boyfriend plans to do to me." After saying this, Gino walked towards Chloe and pulled Clark up. A group of people helped the fainting Clark out of the corridor. And as the noisy corridor was gradually left behind by Gino, today was destined to be a sleepless night. "What should we do?" "Send him to the hospital." In a sports car, Chloe struggled to lift Clark's shoulders. She felt like she was carrying a bull. "No, there is no need to send him to the hospital." Gino breathed out and held out 3 fingers. 3, 2, 1. As the words fell, Clark, who was originally unconscious, suddenly woke up, opened his eyes and gasped for air. Chloe and Peter on the side looked like they had seen a ghost, and they looked at Gino with a layer of awe in their eyes. "Looks like he can predict the future." Clark, who woke up, rubbed his forehead. The boy took a few seconds to confirm his status. Then he looked at Gino with worried eyes and said seriously, "We need to talk, Gino." Clark couldn't describe how he felt now. There is excitement, hesitation, and confusion. The loneliness that had lingered around Clark for a long time seemed to disappear instantly. This was something called a sense of identity. Just like a wild wolf in captivity is still a wolf, even if it learns to flick its tail like a hound, the things imprinted in its DNA will never change. It is still essentially a wolf, just imitating a dog. Gino shrugged. Of course. At this moment, ambulances and police cars roared outside the school gate. Gino pointed to the Bugatti sports car. "But school is not a place for chatting. Follow me." Gino left the school with Clark, and the silver-white Bugatti drove away like a silver stream of light under the dusk, leaving only a confused Chloe and Peter looking at each other. "I always feel like these two guys are a bit mysterious, right?" On a cement bridge outside the town, a silver-white sports car was parked on the side of the road. Gino and Clark stood on the bridge staring at the lake below. The golden lake illuminated by the setting sun reflected their faces. Gino had an indifferent attitude towards revealing his identity to Clark. Clark is not an ordinary person, let alone the other person who awakens his clairvoyance ability in the future. Sooner or later, he will discover abnormalities in his body. Therefore, simply get to the point and seize the initiative. Gino believes that Clark will not reveal his identity to the second person. Because he is lonely, Gino can understand this loneliness, especially under the strict tutoring of Clark's father Jonathan. The loneliness in Clark's heart will only increase day by day. Just like when the Kryptonians attacked in the future, Clark tried his best to establish communication with his compatriots. Whether they are humans or aliens, they all crave social recognition. At this moment, the atmosphere between the two was somewhat silent. Clark didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask Gino if he was in the same state as himself, but the other side was quite critical of Gino's act of breaking Whitney's arm when he disagreed. What do you want to ask, Clark? I will go back to the castle to eat steak later. Gino. Clark pursed his lips and said, you are not a human either, right? Gino. Why is this young man still swearing? He is 100% pure human, just a Kryptonian template. But Gino can understand Clark's mentality. He nodded and said, yes, Clark, I am indeed not an ordinary person. This ability may be related to the meteor shower that landed in the town more than 10 years ago. Since then, I have awakened all kinds of incredible abilities. Hearing Gino's words, Clark's heart trembled. Meteor rain. That was the day I was born. Besides, you are not an ordinary person, right? Gino tilted his head and looked at Clark. A trace of bitterness appeared on the face of this innocent boy. Yes, I am. Not even an ordinary person. But I have always tried my best to make myself ordinary. Clark straightened his chest and stared at Gino. Since God has given us this power, we should use them correctly instead of abusing this ability. It has to be said that Jonathan's training made Clark understand the principle that with great power comes great responsibility since he was a child, so he would not have to imitate the little spider next door and sacrifice Uncle Ben. But facing Clark's serious expression, Gino stretched out a finger and waved it in front of Clark's eyes. His face was still that cynical and frivolous expression, and he only heard him say slowly, no, Clark. I don't agree with your idea. Gino smiled and raised his head and stared at the sunset in the sky. Saving the world, taking responsibility and so on are too tiring. I think very clearly about my own power, and I have a basic bottom line: I will not take action against innocent ordinary people. Under the setting sun, the breeze caressed Gino's long golden hair. His tone was calm but revealed an unquestionable meaning. However, I will use this power to protect myself, my family and my friends. Anyone who messes with me will have to bear the corresponding price. The sun sets in the sky and the moonlight covers the earth. The conversation between Gino and Clark ended unhappily. Clark insists that with great power comes great responsibility, and superpowers should limit their abilities. Gino holds the opposite attitude. He will not use his powerful force to harm innocent people, but he will ruthlessly kill enemies who threaten him. At this moment, outside the small town of Smallville, on the road near Luther Manor, the sports car turned a corner and drove into the manor. The old housekeeper has been waiting for a long time. Gino threw the keys of the sports car to the butler to park the car and walked into the castle. Gorgeous lamps hung in the huge living room. Lex shook his wine glass and sat on a chair. He raised his hand and took a sip of red wine. He looked at Gino triumphantly and said, Chateau Lafite, pure taste. It's a pity that you are not of age and can't drink. Gino sat at his seat, with a steaming steak on the plate. The rosemary juice spread on the surface of the steak, giving it an alluring aroma. Not being able to drink red wine doesn't make me angry, Lex. I don't like that stuff at all. Gino shook his head, holding a knife and fork to cut open the steak, putting it in his mouth to chew and taste. By the way, there's something I have to tell you. Jerome is awake. Lex raised his eyebrows, put down the red wine glass and said, I just wanted to tell you about this. Just this morning, Jerome, who was in the VIP ward of the Metropolitan City, suddenly woke up and then disappeared instantly. After that, the entire hospital lost power for half a minute. Disappeared suddenly. Gino frowned. You mean he has superpowers like me? Lex put his chin on his hands and nodded, I'm afraid so. The meteor shower many years ago created too many unknowns and accidents, as well as your terrifying abilities. This is why we came back here, brother. Gino glanced at Lex's bald head. If we can solve the mystery of the meteorite, maybe you can regain the hair you lost. Listening to Gino's sarcasm, Lex's face darkened. We said we weren't allowed to talk about my hair. My fault, my fault. Gino smiled and raised his hands to express surrender. When his brother was angry, he would ignore him like a little girl for several days in a row. Well, actually, from a certain point of view, Lex is a dark, disabled and arrogant boy. But Jerome actually gained superpowers. Gino rubbed his chin, looked at Lex and said, Lex, be careful lately. When I was at school in the afternoon, I received a threat from Jerome. Threat? Lex's face looked a little ugly, and he guessed what Jerome was thinking. Is it because of the incident 13 years ago? He thought we would die without saving him. That's right. Gino nodded, feeling helpless about Genomie's neurotic brain circuitry. Master, maybe I shouldn't disturb your meal. The old butler Jarvis, wearing a tuxedo with one hand behind his back, said politely, but a group of police officers came from outside the manor and planned to ask the young master about the situation. After hearing the butler's announcement, Lex couldn't sit still and stood up. Asking about the situation, he looked at Gino. What happened? Was your ability exposed? At this moment, Lex has begun to think about whether he needs to hire some killers to kill all the insiders to ensure Gino's safety. Gino shook his head and said, "No, not really. I broke the bully's arm as quickly as possible. No one noticed, and the police were just confused." After hearing Gino's words, Lex regained his composure. As a relative, he knew Gino's strength, and he knew even more that the world was not ready to welcome superhumans. Lex turned to the old butler and said, "Butler, tell the police that we don't have time to cooperate with their investigation." As the eldest son of the powerful Luther family, Lex is not afraid of the consequences of not cooperating with the police. The old butler nodded and left. After a while, he turned back and reported, "As you wish, the police have left." In a free America, capitalists have a very strong say, and the small-town police dare not offend the local tax-paying company, the Luther Group. And this is the power of capital. The policemen left in dejection after encountering disappointment at Luther Manor. The police car turned left and right and then came to Kent Farm, which is also Clark's home. Compared with the submissive attitude at the manor, two local policemen came directly to the door of Jonathan's house. They knocked on the wooden door roughly. "Mr. Jonathan Kent. We are small-town police. There are some matters that require your son to cooperate in the investigation." The family who were eating around the wooden table in the room looked at each other. Martha looked at Clark with some worry, subconsciously feeling that her son had caused some trouble. Jonathan signaled his wife to calm down, then glanced at Clark, who was a little panicked. He stood up, opened the door, and blocked the police with his body. "Officers, this is Jonathan Kent." What did Clark do? The leading police officer took out a small notebook and said, "It's an incident that happened at Smallville High School. The football captain in the same grade as your son suffered an inexplicable fracture in his arm during a fight. His arm was shattered and he will never be able to play football again. According to witnesses, the other party had a conflict with the new transfer student Gino Luther. And your son wanted to stop the conflict and witness the whole process." The policeman said with an expressionless expression, "We want to know what happened." Listening to the police officer's statement, and thinking of his child's terrifying abilities, Jonathan's face became gloomy and scary. He mistakenly thought that Clark had broken Whitney's arm and left him disabled. After all, only his son has this terrifying ability. But years of education convinced Jonathan that Clark was not the person to do such a thing. For a moment, Jonathan felt a little confused. "Are you looking for me?" At this time, Clark, who heard the noise, came to Jonathan and looked at the police officer. The two police officers glanced at Clark and said, "Yes, classmate Clark, do you know how Whitney's injuries were caused?" Clark was silent for a moment and met the eyes of the two police officers. There was also the suspicious gaze of his father Jonathan. Clark was a little sad at this moment. He didn't expect that his father would suspect that he did it. Think again of the conversation he had with Gino not long ago. The words that the other party said at that time, the wolf mistakenly thought that he would be accepted by the dogs by disguising himself as a hunting dog, but the wolf is still a wolf after all. Clark was extremely shaken in his heart. After a moment of silence, Clark made up his mind. He raised his head and stared at the two police officers. "Sorry, I didn't know what happened at the time. Whitney's inexplicable fracture of her arm might be some kind of supernatural event." Kent Farm. The two policemen left the farm without a clue and interviewed several people for their confessions, but the final results were somewhat unsatisfactory. Just like Clark said, it was as if this was a supernatural event. Clark followed his father Jonathan back into the house. What happened? Martha, Jonathan's wife and Clark's adoptive mother, looked at the father and son worriedly. "I heard the police talking about conflicts on campus." "Clark, did you have a conflict with your classmates?" Clark shook his head. "No, not me, Mom, I didn't fight." But Jonathan seized the opportunity and said, then who broke Whitney's arm? Clark, I can see a guilty conscience from your eyes. As a son who was raised by himself, Jonathan is very familiar with Clark's micro-expressions. Also, why do you have contact with the Luther family? Jonathan rubbed his forehead with a headache. The Luther family are all exquisite, selfish and insidious guys. Jonathan. Martha looked at her husband with some dissatisfaction. You can't use these words to comment on a person you have never met. No, the opposite is true. Jonathan shook his head and his eyes fell on Clark. I met Lana's aunt when I went to the town to purchase ingredients in the afternoon. She told me about the younger son of the Luther family. She told me about the younger son of the Luther family this morning. I took Clark racing and almost hit a school bus. But it didn't hit him, Father, Gino is sure of it. Clark raised his head and subconsciously retorted. He had seen Gino's terrifying reaction speed. Avoiding the school bus was as easy as breathing. Gino. Jonathan repeated his name. Your new friend's name is Gino Luther, right? Jonathan shook his head with a headache, but this behavior is undoubtedly leaving the safety of others behind. It is a crazy behavior, Clark. If you can, I want you to stay away from that guy. Even if they have never met, Jonathan can infer Gino's character based on Gino's behavior in the town, which is an extremely indifferent attitude towards strangers. He didn't want Clark to get along with such a person and be influenced into an irresponsible guy. Yeah, you always teach me what to do. Clark lowered his head, impatience written on his face, and raised his fingers to criticize his father's discipline. Can't go to rugby games, can't go run. Clark raised his head a little rebelliously. I have tried very hard to be an ordinary person, Father, but now do I have to comply with your wishes even if I want to make friends? Clark, that's not what I meant. Jonathan wanted to explain, but Clark didn't want to hear it. He stood up and walked up the stairs without touching the food on the plate. Jonathan. His wife Martha held Jonathan's shoulders and said in a reproachful tone, You are too tight on him. Jonathan sighed and said with a complex expression, I know, but I'm more afraid that his inability to control his abilities will be exposed to the world. Tuesday. Early morning. Gino and Lex said goodbye. One went to high school, and the other planned to inspect the Luther family's chemical plant in the town. Lex drove his bright blue sports car speeding down a country road. The billboards and bushes on both sides of the road quickly backed up from both sides of the car window. Here's a wazzy. Lex held the steering wheel with one hand and reached into his pocket with the other hand, intending to smoke a cigarette to relax. Bang! There was an explosion not far away. Lex raised his head and saw a thin young man suddenly standing in the middle of the road, smiling strangely at him. It's time to die, Lex. The young man raised his hands, and countless electric currents instantly covered his arms. Drink. The young man let out a low roar, and the electricity as thick as a python hit the tires of the sports car. Bang, bang. The tires burst and the sports car lost control and hit the roadside at extremely fast speeds. Oh shit. Lex turned the steering wheel hard, but the sports car was still out of control and crashed into the guardrail beside the road bridge. Wow. The iron railing, which was broken into several sections, fell into the cold and biting river together with the sports car. At the same time that Lex fell into the lake, Clark, who was driving at super speed not far away, happened to pass by this road. He witnessed a man with lightning flashing his hands blast a sports car into a lake, and then fled the murder scene at extremely fast speeds. I have to save people. Clark stopped and without hesitation plunged into the lake and swam toward the bottom. Inside the sports car at this moment. Dark, cold, and depressing, this was Lex's first feeling. Countless lakes of water flowed in through the cracks in the car door, and the originally expensive sports car now became a life-threatening water cage. Aha! Lex's mouth and nose were filled with lake water. He struggled to open his eyes but could only see a blur of chaos. After taking a few sips of lake water and being unable to breathe, Lex's vision gradually blurred, and when it became blurry, it seemed as if a figure was slowly swimming towards him. Plop! Clark jumped into the water and swam through the lake like a torpedo to the front of the car. Glancing at Lex, who was unconscious due to water and lack of oxygen in the car, Clark reached out and grabbed the roof of the car and pulled hard. The solid roof was torn open with huge force, revealing a big hole. Clark reached out and grabbed Lex's collar, pulling him out of the lake. Laying the unconscious Lex flat on the grass by the lake, Clark leaned down and listened to Lex's heartbeat. The heartbeat was weak, and Clark had no time to hesitate. He opened Lex's mouth and began to give Lex artificial respiration according to the first aid knowledge he learned from his father Jonathan when he was a child. Don't die, hold on. Clark followed first aid knowledge, and while ventilating Lex, he folded his hands and pressed Lex's chest. Under Clark's constant pressure, soon the unconscious Lex opened his mouth and spurted out a large mouthful of lake water. Seeing Lex regain consciousness, Clark also had an expression of relief on his face. Ahem. Lex coughed violently when he woke up. He slowly opened his eyes, and what he saw was a childish and young face. Did you save me? Lex stared up at Clark. Yes, you look like you need help. I saw a weird guy attacked you. Clark frowned and said what he had seen before, the figure that suddenly appeared. Yes, this is a premeditated murder. Lex Feng Qingyun smiled lightly, but in the bottom of his heart, he thought of Gino's warning last night. Maybe the guy who just attacked him was the one who suddenly disappeared not long ago and gained superpowers. Genemy. Smallville Township High School. In the corridor, Gino threw his school bag behind his back with one hand and put his other hand in his pocket, ignoring the strange looks from the students around him and walking towards the classroom. Doo-doo. Gino picked up the phone and pressed the connect button. Clark's voice rang on the other end of the phone. Gino, your brother fell into the water. Chapter 11. Buzz. The silver Bugatti sports car swept across the field like a stream of light, and the surrounding scene passed by like flowing water. In the driving seat, Gino controlled the sports car with a gloomy expression. Just a few minutes ago, he learned what happened from Clark. My brother was attacked by Jerome. Jerome. Gino turned the steering wheel lightly and turned, and a bridge appeared in his field of vision. The bridge was filled with ambulances and crowds. Gino also saw a scrapped sports car that had been salvaged from the shore. Bang! Gino opened the door and hurriedly pushed through the crowd to see Lex and Clark wrapped in red thermal blankets. At this moment, several police officers were surrounding the two people asking about the incident. Before Gino could get closer, he heard Lex's voice. It was just an ordinary car accident. I didn't see the road clearly and hit the highway bridge. Regarding the matter of extraordinary existence, Lex chose to hide it. On the other side, Clark sat on the rubble on the shore without saying a word. He acquiesced to Lex's words. If we say, this car accident was caused by a supernatural being, then people would just think they were crazy because they were hit with concussions. Lex, are you okay? Gino came to Lex's side and nodded to Clark to express his gratitude. If it weren't for Clark, my brother would probably be in trouble. Gino walked up to Lex, patted the cheap guy on the shoulder, and said in a low voice, I will find that guy, brother. We'll talk about something later. Lex glanced at Clark thoughtfully and glanced at his scrapped sports car. Can ordinary people tear off the roof of a sports car by hand? Clark. Not far away. After learning the news, Jonathan ran down the dirt road beside the bridge. The middle-aged man looked nervous. When he saw Clark sitting on the stone, Jonathan rushed forward and clasped Clark's shoulders with both hands. He said in an excited tone, My child, are you okay? Clark looked into his father's eyes and felt the worried look on his face. Clark felt a warm current passing through his heart. He smiled and shook his head and said, I'm fine, Dad. After confirming that Clark was okay, Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time he was very angry and turned to look at the town policeman who was recording the confession, who is the lunatic driving the car. It's me, Mr. Jonathan. Lex Luthor. Lex stood up and stared at Jonathan seriously. Mr. Jonathan, I am very grateful that your son saved me. Jonathan glanced at Lex, pursed his lips, and the middle-aged man opened his mouth and said, Maybe you should drive slower. I will. Thank Clark again for saving my life. Lex's eyes fell on Clark's young cheeks. It's nothing. I believe if it were you, you would do the same thing. Future Superman looked up at Lex with a serious look on his face. Mr. Jonathan. Gino took a step forward. This also made Jonathan notice Gino. The man glanced at Gino. With long blonde hair and a handsome face, if his guess was correct, this guy was Clark's new friend yesterday, the crazy kid who crashed his car into a school bus. The first impression was very bad, but his good upbringing still made Jonathan nodded with a stiff face. Jonathan Kent, this is my son Clark Kent. I believe you guys already know him. Yes, Clark is a very good friend, and I can see your family tradition in him. Gino nodded slightly in a personable manner, and followed the topic. Can I invite you to Luther Castle? You saved my brother's life, maybe we should be able to give you something in return. Before Gino could finish his words, he was interrupted by Jonathan. The middle-aged man shook his head and helped Clark stand up and said, I don't need your reward. Kindness is an act from the heart. If possible, Jonathan walked to Gino's side and turned to look at the young man's profile. I hope you can tell your brother to drive slower next time. After saying this, Jonathan left with Clark. Whoosh. The river was flowing not far away. Lex walked to Gino and looked at the figures of Jonathan and his son, noble character. Yes. Gino sighed with a complicated expression, then shook his head and said, Lex, stay in the castle during this time. I will find Jerome as soon as possible and kill him. Just like what I have thought since I was a child, whoever dares to touch his family must pay a heavy price. Jerome must die, Jesus cannot save him even if he comes. No, Gino, I hope you can capture him alive. To Gino's surprise, Lex asked to catch him alive. Ah, Gino looked into Lex's eyes with a strange expression, but his brother's expression was serious and it didn't look like he was joking. He set the flag on his own. Was Lex intentional? So, you mean? Lex nodded. Gino turned his head and quickly guessed what Lex was thinking. My brother probably wanted to use Jerome as a guinea pig. Okay, I'll try my best to capture him alive. Gino sighed, thinking about how to find clues about Jerome. More than 10 years ago, that guy was treated as a scarecrow in high school, and the other person's previous phone calls were all about revenge. While thinking about it, an inspiration flashed in Gino's mind. I'm going back to school first. Gino didn't have time to explain to Lex, and immediately walked back to his sports car and drove back to school. Back in high school, Gino asked a classmate for the location of the campus newspaper, and then rushed to the newspaper office. Schools such as small-town high schools all implement happy education, so there are various clubs that have nothing to do with learning. Such as rugby club, basketball games, etc. The location of the campus newspaper is located on the right corner of the first floor of the main teaching building, in a room that was originally converted from a utility room. When Gino opened the door and walked in, he saw countless paper-cutting news plastered all over the wall. Gino, Chloe, who was lying in front of the computer processing documents, was a little surprised when Gino burst into the house. Little Black Pete was a little curious and said, You missed gym class and the coach was very angry. It doesn't matter. Gino shook his head, then walked to Chloe and patted the girl's shoulder. His big blue eyes stared at Chloe seriously. Chloe, I need your help. Okay. Chloe lowered her head in a panic to avoid Gino's gaze, and gently stroked her short hair beside her ears as if unintentionally. What do you need me to do for you? Peter on the side couldn't help but show an expression of hatred when he saw this scene, but he quickly stood next to Gino, intending to eat the melon. Gino ignored Peter, pinched his chin and said, Help me find someone, probably a former student of the school named Jerome Carey. The newspaper club has been established for a long time, and Chloe's computer is also connected to the campus internet. The girl moved the mouse and tapped the keyboard. Soon, a photo of Jerome's head popped up on the girl's computer desktop. Name: Jerome Carey. 12 years ago, I was a high school student with excellent grades. However, after falling into a coma due to a wild disaster, I received funding from the Luther Group for 12 years. Chloe slid the roller and glanced at Gino with her peripheral vision. I didn't expect that this man was still connected to the Luther family. So, what are you asking about this guy? Xiaohei was a little gossipy. He and I have some personal matters that need to be dealt with. He woke up not long ago and then disappeared. Gino smiled faintly, and then told Chloe, Please help me check the members of Jerome's rugby team again. Quote. As Chloe clicked the mouse, a group photo of 3 strong men wearing rugby uniforms appeared in Gino's sight. These 3 people are David, Kendi, and Lance. They were the dominant football team that year. Moreover, these guys happened to choose Jerome to be the scarecrow. Peter said mysteriously. My mother's sister's ex-boyfriend's nephew was in the same class as Jerome at the time. The guy was taciturn and often bullied. Quote. Really? Gino pinched his chin and looked at the computer with a ghostly expression. Thank you for your help. I'm going to leave for a while. After getting the information he wanted, Gino didn't stay any longer. He left the keys of his sports car to Chloe and the two of them, and joked with a smile, this is your reward. You guys can drive it home after school. Bring it to school tomorrow. He never hesitates to repay someone for help, but because they are high school classmates, it is not easy for Gino to just throw money at it, as that would change the nature of it. The boss is awesome. Peter raised his eyebrows. That was a sports car, and ordinary people would never be able to get their hands on it. As for having your self-esteem insulted, come on, it's cool to show off to friends and relatives by driving a sports car, so everyone knows you have a friend who drives a sports car. And Peter and Chloe are not that sensitive and introverted. See you tomorrow. Gino waved goodbye and the two opened the door and left. After Gino left, looking at the keys to the sports car on the table, Chloe and Peter looked at each other, and then both stretched out their devil claws towards the sports car. It is mine. Ignoring the commotion in the house fighting for the key, Gino walked out of the office and took out his cell phone to dial the number of the town police chief. Hello, Director George, it's me, Gino Luther. I want to ask you about a few people, Gino said calmly. When Director George on the other end of the phone heard the word Luther, he immediately lowered his voice and said respectfully, Sir, please give me your orders. I need to ask you about a few people. In a free America, rights serve money. The small town of Smallville is quiet and peaceful late at night. The climate here is slightly chilly at night. The full moon hangs high in the sky, and the bright and soft moonlight shines on the street, inside the garage located in the quiet street. The music player is playing a powerful rock song. A young man named David shook his head to the beat of the music while shaking the wrench in his hand to knock on the off-road vehicle in front of him to check its performance. Good boy. David returned to the parking space and twisted the key. He watched the engine roar and a proud smile appeared on the man's face. This business made money. Bang! The man closed the hood, and a figure stood in the corner not far away. The moonlight shone at his feet, making the young man's face flicker. Hey, this is private property. Do you need to repair your car? The middle-aged man frowned and subconsciously clenched the wrench in his hand. David Sken, the former captain of the football team, a popular figure on campus, and the object of girls' admiration, has now turned into a poor car mechanic. A slightly hoarse and youthful voice sounded in the workshop. The boy's words undoubtedly ignited David's anger. Fark, get out of here. He tightened his grip on the wrench and walked towards the man. As the distance between the two people narrowed, the looming face gradually became clearer. Thin figure, sunken cheeks, wearing a cheap white hoodie. What frightened David the most was the man's cold and strange eyes. Wait, David stared at the young man. He felt that this man looked more and more familiar. I seem to know you. You're the scarecrow Jerome. David stared at Jerome, with a look of contempt on his face. He glanced at the young man's clothes. Why do you have the nerve to mock me? You don't look rich either. Listening to the man's words, a hint of joking flashed in Jerome's eyes. No, 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 we are different. He spread his hands. I can mock you, naturally because I have the qualifications and strength to mock you. As soon as he finished speaking, Jerome's hands suddenly lit up with hot blue light. If he looked closely, he saw that it was actually streaks of violent electric current that were jumping and flickering. Snapped. Before the middle-aged man could react, Jerome suddenly grabbed the man's neck. PFF'd. At the moment of skin contact, violent electric currents instantly flowed into the man's body, invading every blood vessel and violently destroying his body tissues. Oh. The man who was irrigated by the electric current was trembling all over and rolling his eyes, creating the famous scene of Wu Jing being electrocuted, and a strong smell of burnt smell surged up from his body. Ha ha. Jerome looked at the struggling man with a sick smile on his face. Yes, that's it. The strong want to humiliate the weak. Isn't this what you once taught me? Die me quickly. While shouting, Jerome continued to increase the current in his hands. Ah! The man let out a shrill scream, and the surrounding electrical appliances also exploded into clouds of sparks under the action of electric current. Crack! Along with the sparks and lightning, Jerome closed his eyes in enjoyment. Yes, that's it. Your screams are my sleeping requiem. Whoosh! Before Jerome had time to enjoy the process of torturing David, a whistling wind sounded in his ears, and he instantly felt a pain in his cheek. Bang! A fist hit the man's face without warning. Boom! The air exploded with a sonic explosion. The next second, the young man suddenly flew out like a baseball, and his body smashed into the scrapped car in the workshop. The huge force made his whole body embedded in the car door. My face! Falling on the car, Jerome wailed and covered his cheek. The punch not only knocked him away, but also broke several teeth on the right half of his face. The bright red blood also slid down the corner of his mouth, which looked quite ugly. For miserable. Who is it? Jerome looked at the dark figure in the corner with a malicious expression. Paw, paw, paw. A tall figure clapped his hands gently and walked out of the darkness. The moonlight dispersed the shadows, revealing a handsome face, but there was a look of contempt on the pretty cheeks. You're right, Jerome. The blond young man rubbed his fists, shook his neck, stared at the young man in the corner and said, the strong should humiliate the weak. Gino paused, hid the smile on his face, and said expressionlessly. So are you ready? Pain, dizziness, and wanting to vomit, this was Jerome's current physical state after being punched by Gino. At this moment, the young man was lying on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. The shirt was stained red with blood. His cheeks were swollen, his brain was dizzy as if it had been filled with lead, and blood flowed from his mouth and nose. Jerome suppressed his nausea and struggled to open his eyes that were red due to concussion. It's you. He looked at the expressionless Gino, who was now crossing his arms and looking down at Jerome. This is impossible. Jerome covered his forehead and stared at Gino. That punch just now was beyond what ordinary people could do. You know, Jerome has also checked his body since waking up. The awakened electric energy has greatly strengthened his body, and even ordinary bullets may not penetrate his skin. But Gino broke several of his teeth with just one punch. Eliminate all options and the one remaining is the truth. The other party has also awakened his superpower. What? You look surprised. Gino sneered. Did you feel that you had awakened your powers, and had bad thoughts in your mind like, I am the chosen one? Gino's eyes were joking. Unfortunately, the reality is that I am far stronger than you. Gino's words successfully broke Jerome's guard. The man's pale cheeks turned from white to red, and then turned faintly black. He was obviously very angry. Shut up, he yelled, raising his arms and shooting out the stored electricity. Crack. The thick electric currents were like roaring thunder dragons. Each electric current was the size of an adult's arm. They struck Gino with violent power. Ha ha ha. Looking at the figure annihilated by the current, Jerome's eyes flashed with pathology. Idiot, do you think I'm arguing with you? I'm just buying time for myself. This is the gap between us, our IQs are crushing. Jerome's expression was ferocious, and he gritted his teeth and roared. Go to hell, soon your brother will go to hell to accompany you. Jerome increased the current output again. Feeling that the overall situation had been decided, Jerome was madly talking. Just as Jerome was venting his emotions, a faint voice came from the current. Jerome, it's not okay to open champagne at halftime. What? Jerome was stunned, and the lightning in his hand gradually went out. How could you? Why don't you hide? As the smoke dissipated, the blond young man stood intact, but unfortunately his custom-made white shirt turned into tatters. Do you need to hide? Gino said calmly. Do you think it's because of IQ crushing? Gino patted the flames on his shirt and raised his eyebrows and said, actually, your attack poses no threat to me. While saying this, Gino walked towards Jerome slowly. He really didn't know where Jerome's confidence came from. Maybe it was because the punch just now broke Jerome's head. You know what? Gino said calmly, like a cat playing with a mouse. Originally I planned to keep you alive and take you back, but now. As soon as the words fell, Gino's whole body instantly turned into an afterimage and suddenly stood in front of Jerome, before he could react. Snapped. An iron hand, as if made of steel, mercilessly clasped Jerome's neck, and his blue eyes stared at Jerome's pale cheek without emotion. I will never allow anyone to threaten my family. So you'd better die. After saying this, Gino raised his other fist and punched it hard. Bang! The arm exerted force, the terrifying power broke through the air and rolled up layers of air waves, and the violent fist hit Jerome hard on the left cheek with strong wind. Gotcha! His fist easily shattered the bones. There was a crisp sound of bone cracking. Jerome's thin cheeks swollen at a speed visible to the naked eye, and several broken teeth mixed with blood fell down his mouth. Gino's punch made Jerome's concussion more serious, and the young man felt that there were 3 kilos smiling at him in front of him. There was a buzzing noise in my ears. Ah, Jerome moaned meaninglessly. Gino's expression remained unchanged, and he raised his fist again. Seeing Gino gradually raise his fist, Jerome trembled in his heart. If he was punched again, he would die. Holding back his nausea, Jerome said with difficulty, I'm sorry. Please let me go. Under the threat of death, Jerome, who was originally tough-talking and arrogant, immediately gave in. I'd like to work for you. He didn't want to die under Gino's fist. A flattering smile appeared on Jerome's face. Gino, you are right. The strong should humiliate the weak. I am the weak. Ha ha. Looking at the subdued Jerome, Gino slightly let go of his left hand, allowing Jerome to breathe. Seeing Gino's ambiguous smile, Jerome quickly prayed again, it's worth more to let me go than to kill me. I can control electricity and have super speed. I'm very strong. Gino tilted his head and nodded in agreement. You were right, living is better than dying. Seeing that Gino's attitude softened, Jerome relaxed in his heart and smiled on his face. Yes, it was all a misunderstanding before. I'm very sorry. But, Gino tilted his head and raised the corners of his mouth slightly, I don't need you to live. Why didn't you say sorry when you attacked my brother? It's too late to apologize now. Gino stared coldly into Jerome's eyes, his eyes were full of cowardice. Gino sneered. If it weren't for the Luther family's support for you, you would have died of being unable to pay your medical bills and would have been euthanized. The medical system in the United States is not as cheap as advertised. On the contrary, in the United States, only rich people get sick, and the poor can only take painkillers to numb themselves. So, Gino said in a long tone, a dead Jerome is a good Jerome. After the words fell, Gino raised his fist. What? Jerome's face changed drastically, and his original joy was instantly filled with anger and resentment. The man's face was ferocious and he roared, fake. You devil, I curse you. At this moment, Jerome was extremely angry. The other party was just playing tricks on him. He wanted to kill himself from the beginning. Bang! Before Jerome could finish his words, an iron fist far more terrifying than last time suddenly hit Jerome on the head. The hard skull shattered instantly like soft tofu under the iron fist. Some blood was sprinkled on Gino's face, making his expression look even more gloomy and terrifying. White stuff mixed with skulls were scattered on the floor, leaving only the headless corpse twitching wildly, proving the unwillingness of the owner of the corpse. Sorry, what did you say? Gino was carrying the headless body and put his other hand on his ear. No one responded. Gino shrugged with regret. In the next life, remember not to threaten other people's families. They don't have a good temper like me. Well, the kind of good temper that blows your head off. Luther Castle. In the middle of the night, the lights of the castle flickered on the mottled wall tiles. The wall tiles were covered with green moss, and in the manor under the wall tiles, several gardeners carried black body bags towards the basement of the castle with expressionless faces. They are all lifelong employees of the Luther Group, with high wages and good benefits. In other words, they can also be regarded as hereditary, official positions, of Luther's dynasty workers. They have strict mouths and don't have to worry about betrayal. Inside the castle at this moment, the luxurious and older fireplace burned brightly, and the burning wood made a crackling sound under the burning flame. So, he's still dead. Lex leaned over the pool table, pointed the cue at the pool ball and pushed lightly. Snapped. After clearing the last pool ball, Lex stood up and looked at Gino, who was lying on the sofa on the other side, enjoying the service of the maid feeding little oranges. Gino bit into the orange and felt the sweet and sour juice bursting in his mouth. He said vaguely, that guy is too extreme. I don't think it's a good thing to keep him alive. Lex shrugged. For his wisdom, there was a difference between living and dead experimental subjects, but it was not big. Okay, but that Clark. Lex dropped the club and picked up the expensive red wine on the table, took a sip and then spit it out. Yes, that guy is also a superhuman. Gino shrugged. His achievements in the future may be the same as your wisdom, and he can reach a height that is unimaginable by humans. I didn't expect you to think so highly of him. Lex raised his eyebrows. He felt that he was one of the smartest people in the world. Because he saved your life, I gave him impression points. Gino rolled his eyes. Speaking of this, Lex scratched his bald head. How do you think I should repay him? Send him an expensive sports car. I remember high school students like this. But Lex had a headache again, and he thought to himself, I remember when I was a kid, my father discussed buying their farm with the Kent family. Even if they offered a sky-high price, the Kents didn't agree. For Lex, money is not an issue, but owing favors is more uncomfortable for a proud person like Lex than killing him, so Lex can't wait to repay the life-saving favor he owes. I think we can let them accept gifts. Gino chuckled. Lex frowned slightly, because Gino's expression was so familiar. Whenever this little fool shows such a smiling expression, the next sentence will definitely mock him. Want to make a bet? Gino stretched out his hand and gently touched the maid's red lips, letting the orange juice stay on the maid's lips. I can let the Kent family accept your gift. The blonde maid also very sensibly poked out her tongue, stared at Gino with her charming eyes, and licked the orange juice from the corner of her mouth. Lex crossed his arms and turned a blind eye to Gino's teasing of the maid. My brother looks bohemian, but he is actually a flirt, and he is still a boy. Lex thought to himself. He was still more curious about whether what Gino said was true. He had seen Jonathan, a righteous and stubborn person with his own ethics. The nicer words are called principled, and the harsher words can only be called very stubborn, just like the rocks in the pit are smelly and hard, but Gino actually said that there is a way to make the Kent family accept gifts. Lex was skeptical at heart. Okay, what's the bet? Lex sneered, not panicking at all. I bet on the contact information of those killers on your mobile phone. Gino too said. You want to kill someone? You can tell me who you want to kill. Lex frowned. To be honest, he didn't want Gino to get too close to those guys in the dark world. It's not murder, it's just that some things need to be done by someone. Gino shook his head without explaining too much. In fact, he was just curious if he had the contact information of the famous assassins in the 600th world. For example, the League of Assassins, or even the famous Deathstroke. Why curious? Because these are all points for walking. As a man who was born at the end of Rome, Gino is not a lunatic who destroys and conquers the world. The education received by ordinary people in his previous life also prevents him from becoming a scumbag, but his determination to become stronger remains unchanged. There is no such thing as strong, only stronger, and if you want to become stronger, you need the negative emotions of the strong to provide points. This is the logic of Gino. Lex on the side frowned thoughtfully after listening to Gino's words, but the smart bald man nodded after thinking about it. Okay, I believe you can handle these things, let's make a bet. As he spoke, Lex turned his head and looked at the garage outside the window. I remember there seems to be a Cadillac in the garage. It was a brand new day. When Gino opened his eyes and woke up from the 3-meter-wide soft bed, the obedient maids had already prepared breakfast. After bringing the steaming food to the bed, Gino simply ate some seagull egg rolls with milk, silently criticizing the simple and unpretentious life of Zimoto's family. After getting dressed, Gino picked up the Cadillac keys on the table, spoke to Lex and drove to school. While passing by Kent Farm, Gino happened to meet Clark, who was waiting for the school bus. But it seemed that Clark was in a bad mood, with a gloomy look on his face, as if someone owed him $1 million. When the car approached Clark, Gino also heard the system broadcast in his mind. A negative emotions from Clark Kent +50, +50, A. What's going on? Gino was shocked. Clark's negative emotions crazily sent gold coins to the system early in the morning, but thinking that this was the youth version of Clark Kent, he also had some guesses in his mind. Adolescent children only care about those 3 things: face, money, and money. All 3 could be reasons for Clark's bad mood. Looking at Clark's declining expression, Gino guessed that the latter was more likely. The poor innocent boy Clark might have been emotionally frustrated. While thinking about it, Gino stepped on the accelerator. The roar of the red off-road vehicle interrupted Clark's thoughts. Last night, Clark, who used a telescope to observe the movements of the goddess, witnessed with his own eyes the scene of the goddess Lana Blue kissing Whitney, who had a broken arm and was in a plaster. This made Clark's feeling very bad. Hey, Clark. Gino lightly stepped on the brakes and stopped the off-road vehicle in front of Clark. He patted the co-pilot with a frivolous brow and said, "Waiting for the school bus again." "Just kidding, he is a scoring machine in action, can he still let Clark escape?" The red SUV stopped in front of Clark, and Gino turned off the engine and pushed open the door. "It's for you." Gino threw the key in his hand and walked to Clark. "What?" Clark looked confused and subconsciously took the car keys thrown by Gino with his right hand. Weeds were all over the ground, and the breeze brought fresh air. Clark took a deep breath, and for the first time, he felt his heartbeat speed up. The key to the off-road vehicle lay quietly in his palm. Just like Lex said, the dream of many American high school students is to have their own car. Clark looked at the car keys in his hand, and then moved his eyes to the red off-road sports car in front of him. The rough and ferocious body, the flowing lines of the car, and the red paint made this off-road vehicle extremely eye-catching on the road. If I were to drive such a car on the road, it would surely attract Lana's attention, right? Clark didn't notice at all. The corners of his originally lowered mouth were slightly raised, and the arc of his smile could hardly be suppressed. Well, Clark looked like a big licking dog at this moment. But, why? Clark clenched his fists excitedly and looked at Gino beside him. Why did the other party give him an expensive off-road vehicle? The blonde boy chuckled, gently hooked Clark's neck, patted Clark's shoulder, and pointed at the sports car with the arm on Clark's shoulder, Cadillac Escalade. "This car is a gift from me to you, thank you for saving my brother." Gino felt that a person should know how to repay kindness. If someone saved his brother, it wouldn't be too much to give him a $300,000 United States dollars off-road vehicle. Wow, this is really true. Clark gasped excitedly and walked slowly around the red off-road vehicle, like a relative meeting. He carefully stretched out his palm and put it against the car, his face full of excitement and happiness. However, when he thought of his stern father, Clark's originally smiling cheeks froze slightly, his energy became depressed, and he lowered his head in frustration. "I'm sorry, Gino, I can't accept such an expensive gift." He knew that his father would never let him accept Gino's gift. A negative emotion from Clark Kent +1. Seeing Clark's reaction, Gino was not surprised. After all, the big boy had a strict father, and it was impossible for him to let Clark accept such an expensive gift. But that makes it more challenging, right? After all, the two things a man loves most in life are to persuade prostitutes to be good and to force good men to become prostitutes. Today, Clark must accept this off-road vehicle. He has never lost a bet with Lex. Moreover, Gino had thought of a way before he came. No. Gino raised his eyebrows. Clark was silent and nodded with difficulty for a long time. "Yes, please go back. I don't save people in return." Clark lowered his head and nodded lightly. "Okay, let's smash it." Gino raised his fist and then suddenly smashed it towards the hood of the off-road vehicle. "What?" Clark's face changed drastically as he watched Gino's unhurried fist about to land on the hood. Clark has seen the power of Gino. This punch will definitely smash the car engine and turn it into a pile of scrap metal. The fist was getting closer and closer. It seemed that what Gino wanted to smash was just a piece of cheap tofu. His handsome face was full of calmness and ruthlessness. Clark rarely cursed. Snapped. The moment his fist fell, Clark raised his right hand and clasped Gino's wrist. "Why did you smash it?" Clark was a little angry, staring at Gino's blue eyes with his big eyes, as if he wanted to see what was in Gino's heart. "Smashing expensive cars is a waste of wealth. Because it's a gift for you." Gino gently shook off Clark's arm and said calmly, "There is no precedent for returning gifts sent by the Luther family." Gino glanced at Clark accidentally. "If you don't want it, you can only smash it." With that said, Gino raised his fist again. Arrogant and domineering, this is the true portrayal of Gino at this moment. "Wait." Clark pursed his lips and clasped Gino's wrist. He really couldn't accept the off-road vehicle being scrapped in front of his eyes, but he couldn't accept this gift either. Gino saw the confusion in Clark's eyes, and he changed his words and said, "Since you won't let me smash it, then let me keep this car with you for now, Clark." Keeping it, Clark thought thoughtfully, then smiled bitterly. The safekeeping that Gino mentioned was probably for a lifetime. What's the difference between this and a disguised gift? This is another way of saying it. Gino didn't care about Clark's thoughts. He opened the passenger door, took out his sunglasses from his white shirt pocket and put them on. He looked down at his watch, knocked on the car door, and turned to look at Clark, who was standing on the roadside with a complicated expression. "Can you drive? If you don't leave, we'll be late." Alas, Clark sighed, but the smile on his lips still proved that he was in a good mood. "Yes, I learned to get a driver's license last summer." Clark opened the car door with excitement, inserted the key and turned the ignition. The off-road vehicle roared, and the powerful push on his back made Clark's blood boil. Clark glanced at Gino gratefully, and the bitter and resentful expression on his face disappeared, replaced by a spirit of high spirits, and shouted loudly, "Gino, sit down." "Oh." Gino raised his eyebrows and complimented, "Why?" "Because." Clark put the gear into gear and released the clutch, then stepped on the accelerator with his right foot to increase the engine speed. "The next step will be very soon." Smallville Township High School. Buzz. Chloe carefully drove the silver Bugatti sports car to a slow stop in front of the parking space. Little Black Pete followed Chloe out of the sports car, patted the car with some reluctance, and murmured, "Man, I'm going to miss your speed. Don't be depressed. Maybe if you work hard and endure hardship, you can buy this sports car sooner or later." Chloe carried her school bag. "Come on, I can't afford this sports car even if I sell all my internal organs." Little Black Pete rolled his eyes. He didn't believe in the silly rhetoric of making money through hard work. Buzz. The roar of an off-road vehicle interrupted their thoughts. Many students walking into the campus stopped and turned to look into the distance. A red off-road monster drove into the parking lot at a neither fast nor slow speed and parked in the left parking space of the silver sports car. "Good morning, everyone." Clark, with a bright face, opened the door and stepped out of the car. "Your keys." Chloe walked towards Gino to return the keys to the sports car. "Wow, Gino, how many cars do you have?" Pete looked at the steel behemoth in front of him with an expression of emotion. "This red off-road vehicle is so cool." "I don't know, probably more than 10, but this car no longer belongs to me, it belongs to Clark now." Gino smiled and patted Clark on the shoulder, while Clark smiled shyly. "I just keep it for you, eh?" However, when Chloe and Peter heard Gino's explanation, their eyes widened, as if they had seen a ghost. "What?" The two looked at each other and said in unison, "You gave Clark a car." For a moment, Chloe even thought that Gino might not have any bad thoughts about Clark, otherwise why would he give Clark a car for no reason? Are all rich people so willful? "What's that look in your eyes?" Gino noticed Chloe's gaze and unceremoniously stretched out his hand to hold the girl's head, and rubbed Chloe's short blonde hair with a little force. The girl was in pain and screamed, "I just washed my hair." Chloe covered her head pitifully, and pushed Gino's mischievous hand away with her small hands. "Because Clark saved my brother, this car is a thank you to Clark." Gino retracted his arms and put his hands in his pockets to explain. "What, you saved Gino's brother?" Peter looked at Clark in surprise. "No wonder you didn't come to school that day. It's just a piece of cake." Clark scratched his cheek in embarrassment, while Little Black Pete sighed. "If I had known, I would have skipped class that day." "Come on, you can't swim." Chloe exposed Peter ruthlessly. The group of people walked towards the teaching building chatting and laughing. The campus was bustling with people in the early morning. Gino glanced at the crowd and landed on Whitney, who was wearing a plaster. This guy was surrounded by school team members wearing baseball jackets and was walking towards the playground under the leadership of the physical education teacher. The physical education teacher on campus is a middle-aged white man with a wide body and fat body. His hair is covered with hair gel, which makes him look like a gangster. "Wait a minute, kids." Coach Watt frowned, his fat cheeks squeezing, as if carving a big word, "chew on his forehead. The man loosened his collar, and his fat belly trembled slightly. He stared at the group of 4 people walking towards the teaching building not far away, and his eyes fell on Gino. "That kid hurt your arm." "Whitney." Coach Watt glanced at Whitney from the corner of his eye. Whitney gritted her teeth and nodded slightly. "Yes, I suspect it's him." Although the incident of his amputated hand that day became an unsolved case in the town, Whitney's intuition told him that it was probably Gino's fault. "I remember, he skipped my PE class yesterday." Coach Watt squinted his eyes slightly, showing off his fiery temper. The man walked towards Gino. The rugby players behind him made eye contact with each other, and then followed Coach Watt to watch. The excitement of Gino. Their coach is not a good-tempered boss. He has a hot temper and hits and scolds the players. Kid, Coach Watt yelled, stopping the 4 people who were rushing to school. Oh, it's Coach Watt. He may be asking you about not coming to class yesterday. Little Black Pete shrank his head. It was obvious that he was very afraid of this coach. Chloe also gave Gino a look that was asking for blessings. She felt that Gino would be unlucky today. Clark was the only one with a worried expression. He tensed up, worried about a conflict between Gino and Coach Watt, and then Gino broke Coach Watt's arm in anger. He needs to be ready to stop Gino. What's the matter? Gino stopped and turned to look at Coach Watt, who was several heads shorter than him. From Gino's perspective, Coach Watt looks like an angry groundhog at this moment. Coach Watt stared at Gino, the two looked at each other, and the air seemed to be burning with an intangible flame. However, having experienced strong winds and waves since childhood, the gap between Coach Watt and Gino was as huge as the area of the ocean, whether it was mentality or momentum. In the end, Coach Watt couldn't bear such a cold atmosphere, and sneered and said, "Gino." "Luther, right, eh? It's me." Gino nodded indifferently. He was not a fool. He could tell that this middle-aged man came with bad intentions, so Gino's reaction was not enthusiastic. "What's the matter?" Before Gino could finish his words, he was interrupted by Coach Watt. "Shut up, kid." Coach Watt's voice was very high, almost a roar when he was talking to Gino. He stared at Gino with his bull's eyes, pointed at himself with his right hand, and nodded at Gino from a distance. "I said, you listen, do you understand?" With that said, before Gino could react, the man said, "In view of your behavior of skipping class yesterday, I think you should be given some punishment." The man turned to look at his football team and sneered, "I don't care if you are a Luther family or some other bullshit family. Here, if you skip class, you must be punished." The middle-aged man stared at Gino's beautiful cheeks and said with a sinister smile, "And your punishment is to wash the socks of all the key players on the football team for a week." After the words fell, the team members behind him let out a burst of ridicule and sarcasm. "Wow, looks like I won't be changing my socks for a few weeks then. I think we should change them 3 times a day and let him wash a few more pairs." Listening to the sarcasm of these people, Gino looked calm, but the 3 people beside him couldn't stand still. "Coach, this is against school rules." Chloe said first. "The punishment for students skipping class is only to write a 1,000-word self-criticism. It does not include washing other people's socks." "Yes, you are abusing your power, Coach Watt," Clark said with a serious face as he took a firm step forward to express his determination to stand. Me too." Little Black Pete gritted his teeth and hesitated before slowly raising his hand. "Shut up, you have no right to speak here." Watt gritted his teeth and stared at the 3 of them. "Get out of here before I get angry. Otherwise, you wash socks with him." Listening to Watt's roar, the 3 of them couldn't help but turn pale. For the 3 simple high school students, the power brought by the roaring Coach Watt made them fearful. At this moment, many students passing by were secretly observing the group, and many were whispering with their companions about what happened. "So, did you hear what I said?" Coach Watt looked at Gino, who was calm but silent, with a proud look on his face. Even if he is from the Luther family, he is just a high school student. Isn't it easy for him to suppress a high school student with the authority he has formed as a coach for more than 10 years? Looking at the arrogant Watt, even Clark couldn't help but feel angry, but Clark found that Gino was unexpectedly calm. "Watt, roaring won't win people's respect." Under Clark's gaze, Gino slowly spoke. The boy sighed and stared at the school badge on Watt's clothes. "If I remember correctly, the Luther group the city will provide $500,000 to the small town AS high school for school development and staff welfare, eh? I have always felt that the teachers at Smallville Township High School should be polite and well educated. But your performance has greatly refreshed my understanding of the school." Gino took out his mobile phone without hesitation and dialed Lex's number. "Maybe I should ask my brother to stop funding the high school." Gino put the phone to his ear and smiled evilly at Watt. "When school leaders know why, I hope I can still hear your roar. There may be typos if you type too fast. Readers may see that you can press and hold the wrong field to correct it. Xiaomo will correct it if he sees it. Gino still remembers the education department of the tutor hired by his father when he was a child. There is a class that discusses society. Gino remembers several questions the teacher asked. What is the nature of social functioning? In Kenoa's view, it is the plundering and exploitation of social resources. Reciprocal power evolves based on the amount of social resources possessed. Those with abundant resources will have more privileges. So, what is power? It is a kind of cruel beast that is invisible and intangible, but it hides in the darkness and kills invisible people under the sea. As a second generation, Gino knows that his family's power can allow him to walk sideways in a free America. He doesn't like to use power to oppress others, but that doesn't mean he won't use his power, especially when dealing with a brainless fool like Watt. The verbal offense would not cause Gino to break Watt's arm, but it was necessary to punish Watt. And how to make Watt pay the price? All he needed was a phone call to make Watt pay for his actions. This is the power of power. At this moment, everyone outside the campus was shocked by Gino's operation. Whitney swallowed nervously, her arm in a cast aching. What did he hear? The Luther Group actually donates $500,000 to the school every year. This means that many of the staff's salaries come from the Luther Group's funding. If the Luther Group really stops funding the high school department, the staff's salaries may have to be cut significantly. There are not a few students who have this idea, and many of them focus on Coach Watt, whose face is ashen. At this moment, Coach Watt clenched his fists, and he swore that if he was in a deserted corner, he would beat this brat hard. While thinking about it, Coach Watt stared at Gino's calm face with eyes full of resentment. He originally thought that this kid would do some tricks like suing parents, but he didn't expect that he would just flip the table. Will the school give up $500,000 in annual funding for itself? Coach Watt shook his head in his heart, deceiving himself and thinking. No, I brought out 4-time rugby club champions in the town, and the school will not fire me. Gino didn't know Watt's tangled and nervous mood at the moment, but even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the call was connected, and Gino smiled and pressed the hands-free button on the phone with his thumb. Hello, Lex's voice rang from the phone. I have something to talk about. I'm having a meeting at the company. Lex's style is as concise and efficient as ever. In addition to being a scientist, Lex is also a qualified businessman. Lex, I was just threatened by a teacher to wash the stinky socks of the campus football team for a week. Gino said unhurriedly, while staring at Coach Watt, his eyes full of mockery. I think we should stop annual funding for schools. Washing socks. Lex on the other end of the phone was currently sitting in an empty conference room, leaning his bald head gently on the boss's chair, and couldn't help but sneered. Someone actually threatened his brother to wash his socks. None of his brothers had washed themselves. Lex's first reaction was to put pressure on the school to fire this reckless physical education teacher. But then I thought, Gino should have his own plan, so Lex was silent for a moment and said, I will ask the secretary to inform the school principal. After saying that, Lex hung up the phone and looked at the secretary who was waiting beside him. Go and inform Smallville Town High School that starting today, Lex Group will stop funding the school. The secretary was stunned for a moment, then subconsciously reminded, Boss, but funding for schools can offset our tax collection. In terms of profits, if funding for the campus is stopped, our local businesses may need to pay $1 million in taxes each year. It's not important. Lex interrupted the secretary rudely, looking at the secretary with a pair of eyes. I only know that those guys humiliated my brother, they must show their attitude. Meeting Lex's cold eyes, the secretary's heart trembled, and he quickly bowed his head respectfully. I'll contact you right away. At the school on the other side, Gino hung up the phone and smiled provocatively. Coach Watt. Gino snapped his fingers. Would you like to guess how long it will take for Principal Xiaoguan and the others to arrive? As he spoke, Gino looked down at his watch. I believe it won't take more than a minute. Listening to Gino's words, Coach Watt's expression became even colder. He wanted to open his mouth to say something to give in, but the bustling crowd around him made him open his mouth, but no sound came out. At this moment, the anger in his heart had long dissipated, and Coach Watt was horrified to find that he felt a little more regretful. The long-term comfortable life made him forget the first rule of survival in the United States, which is not to provoke the big family. And now, it's time for him to pay for his actions. Give in, give in. There were shouts in the distance. The crowd watching the excitement was roughly pushed away, and Principal Guan, dressed in a suit, barged in violently with 6 or 7 school leaders with serious faces. They jogged all the way and even their ties were a little crooked. Don't care about tidying up your appearance, Mr. Gino Luther. Upon seeing Gino, Principal Guan suddenly showed an eager smile. Like a caring elder, he clasped Gino's arm and asked, I heard that someone was rude to you. As he spoke, Principal Guan glanced at Coach Watt, who was standing there blankly, with a look of disgust. The staff behind him also stared at Watt with disgust, and the meaning in their eyes made Coach Watt fearful. They were planning to fire him. The students looked at the sudden appearance of the school leaders in shock. Chloe poked the little black Pete and Clark, who were addicted to eating melon, with her elbow, lowered her voice and lowered her head and said, it only took 40 seconds. Yeah, because I skipped class yesterday. Coach Watt asked me to clean the socks for the school football team for a week. Gino stared at Watt's blue cheeks with a half smile. His original arrogant attitude was gone, and now he looked like an unemployed middle-aged man. He is a young social animal, his eyes full of confusion. But Gino would not pity this guy. If he was just an ordinary student, then accepting the humiliation of cleaning socks for a week would be his inevitable fate. Therefore, when dealing with evil people, Gino is stingy with his kindness and kindness. To be kind to evil people is to be cruel to good people. So that's it. Principal Guan frowned, secretly cursing Watt that he drank too much every day after work and damaged his brain. If you ask a rich second generation to wash the socks of your rugby players, are you worthy of it? While thinking about it, Principal Guan gave the other leaders a look. No matter what, things have happened. They must find a way to calm down the anger of the Luther family and keep the indispensable $500,000. Coach Watt, the leader responsible for managing the student code, took a step forward and said righteously, according to the school's Student Code of Conduct Law Management Regulations, students who skip classes only need to write a 1,000-word review. Your behavior seriously violated the school rules. Moreover, treating a student in this way will cause great harm to his body and mind. There is a saying that goes well, when you succeed, everyone will be kind and lovely to you. In the same way, when you are a rich second generation, only respect and humility will remain on people's faces. At this moment, the two levels were reversed, and a group of school leaders attacked Coach Watt mercilessly with all their firepower. The person in charge of managing teacher transfers was a middle-aged white woman. She said expressionlessly, threatening students with corporal punishment is shameless. Coach Watt, you must leave this school. That's right, Coach Watt, your behavior will bring shame to our high school department. Principal Guan also had a righteous expression. Between $500,000 and a physical education teacher, they made their choice without even thinking. How is this possible? Coach Watt opened his mouth with a dull expression. You can't do this. Watt stammered, not knowing where to put his hands. Sometimes he touched his hair filled with hair gel, and sometimes he squeezed his thighs. I bled for the school. I bled for the school. The school competed for 4 championships. He couldn't imagine what would happen if he lost his job. Watt, who had been in this school for decades, had become a cooked frog. If he lost his job, he didn't know what else he could do. Looking for a new school. The Luther group would not let him go, and no school would take him in at the risk of offending the Luther group. Sorry, Watt, we cannot accept your behavior. Principal Guan's expression was calm and he turned a blind eye to Watt's plea. He turned to Gino and once again put on an eager expression. Mr. Gino. Principal Guan's face was full of flattery and respect, and his tone was low and quick. Are you satisfied with the result of this process? If you are satisfied, please tell Mr. Lex and ask him to continue to support the development of the town's high school. Yes, Mr. Gino, you are a good boy. The woman from the Academic Affairs office pursed her lips and lowered her voice. You just skipped 1 class, and I will write 1,000 words of self-criticism for you. Looking at Coach Watt, who looked in decline, there was also a group of school leaders who were surrounding Genu to show their hospitality. Whether it is the football players or the Clarks, everyone's understanding of wealth and power has once again been refreshed. It turns out that having money really does make it possible. In full view. No, I'm not satisfied with the result. Gino spoke slowly, and the atmosphere instantly became deserted. Everyone closed their mouths and looked forward to what Gino would say next. I think it would be cruel to fire Coach Watt. Gino chuckled, with a gentle smile on his face. After all, he has dedicated a lot to this school. Hearing Gino's words, Watt's originally dull eyes suddenly glowed with luster. He stared at Gino with gratitude in his eyes, and his lips moved to say words of thanks. What? Principal Guan looked confused. Could it be that they flattered the horse's legs? Even the three Clarks were confused, thinking that Gino was stupid. Watt was not worthy of pity at all. I think we can give the person who made the mistake a chance. Amid everyone's doubts, Gino glanced at Whitney, who was the one who shouted happily behind Watt just now. So, Gino spoke slowly and said in a long tone, as long as Coach Watt washes Whitney's socks in public, you can stay in this school, and the Luther Group will continue to support the development of the small town high school. Buzz. After Gino finished speaking, the originally silent crowd suddenly became excited. Oh my God, let Coach Watt wash Whitney's socks. Clark in the crowd couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He looked at the confused Whitney, and to be honest, Clark felt a little gloating in his heart. Little Black Pete covered his mouth and said to Clark, oh my God, if I were Coach Watt, I would be so ashamed that I would want to die. This is just killing people or something, that Eastern proverb. Killing kills the heart. Chloe's beautiful eyes stared at Gino's profile and murmured, I almost thought he had become a virgin. It seems that this guy hasn't changed at all. The other side. When he heard Gino's conditions, Watt's expression was as disgusting as if he had swallowed a fly. He originally thought that the other party was showing great kindness, but what greeted him was a deeper humiliation. Gino sneered, looked at Watt, whose face turned pale and green, and urged, make a choice, Coach Watt. Do you want face or work? Anger burned in Watt's heart. At this moment, he wanted to scream and rush forward to kill Gino. This extreme humiliation made Watt clench his fists and his breathing gradually became heavier, like an old scalper whistling and panting. But thinking about the rest of his life, the clenched arms slowly loosened, and Watt endured the humiliation and said, I'll wash it. With that said, Watt turned to look at Whitney and roared, take off your shoes, kid. Watt lowered his voice, if you still want to keep your position as football captain, take off your socks. Also, go get me a basin of water personally. More and more students arrived, and soon some students brought water basins. Whitney had a weird expression, but forced by Watt's eyes, Whitney lowered her head and took off her shoes. Wow, I didn't expect Whitney to be wearing Winnie the Pooh socks. Black Pete unconsciously complained when he saw the socks on Whitney's feet, which made the crowd laugh. The sour smell made everyone retreat unconsciously. Amidst the jeers, Whitney handed Watt her socks. Everyone watched as the fat Watt squatted down, soaked the smelly socks in water and rubbed them. Time after time, it seemed that Watt was not rubbing his socks, but was venting his anger. Coach Watt, I hope you can remember this lesson. Gino looked at the deflated Watt with an expressionless face. To be honest, teaching this kind of clown would not bring him any pleasure at all. Let's go. Gino led the three people and planned to leave. Hey, what happened here? Lana Blue, Whitney's girlfriend, heard the news and rushed here. When she saw her boyfriend standing there with bare feet and red face, while Coach Watt was rubbing his socks, Lana walked towards Gino with a gloomy face. This seems to be bullying, Mr. Gino Luther. You should be ashamed of what you did. Whoa. Before Lana could get closer, Gino and Clark's expressions turned white and blue at the same time. And this unusual scene was also noticed by some interested people. Gino suppressed his dizziness and made up his mind. Kryptonite had too great an impact on him, and he had to take away this gadget that threatened him. The longer I stayed, the weaker I felt. Maybe. Under the influence of kryptonite, Gino did not choose to argue with Lana. The top-heavy Gino gently leaned on Chloe's shoulder and motioned for the girl to take him away. Before leaving, Gino looked deeply at Lana. Miss Lana, I look forward to meeting you next time. The account that Lana scolded in public was written down by herself first. On campus, why do you always look guilty every time you meet Lana Blue? Chloe pouted and put one hand on Gino's waist. Is it possible that you all like that guy? Little Black Pete pretended to be Sherlock Holmes and asked while holding his chin. Away from Lana, the feeling of exhaustion left him. Gino smiled, patted Chloe's shoulder and straightened his back. He glanced at the little black man again and said, maybe it's just your imagination. For schools like Smallville Township High School, they implement happy education, so students are arranged to have free activities in the afternoon of the high school. Clark planned to drive home with Gino, but Gino said he had to take a step forward. So Clark had to drive home alone. While driving an expensive off-road vehicle, he also met Whitney and Lana Blue. Whitney's jealous eyes greatly satisfied Clark's vanity. The car stereo played music called White Flag. Clark moved his head to the music and controlled the off-road vehicle with one hand to drive to his farm. He had never felt so happy. This expensive off-road vehicle was like a bomb that disrupted his life, adding some passion and happiness to the ordinary life. Buzz. Clark stepped on the accelerator lightly, and the roaring SUV slowly stopped in front of the fence. At this moment, Martha, who was handling forage on the farm with Jonathan, slowly raised her head. The middle-aged woman frowned slightly. Jonathan, it seems that a guest is coming. Not far away. Jonathan, holding a pitchfork, looked at the off-road vehicle in front of his house and frowned slightly at the logo on the front of the vehicle. It seems that only the Luther family can afford to drive such a car. Could it be that Clark's classmates are looking for Clark again? Although Clark is not at home now, Jonathan doesn't like the interaction between Gino and Clark. However, when the car door opened, Clark wearing khaki jeans appeared in the field of vision of the Jonathans, which immediately made the Jonathans open their mouths. Clark. Jonathan was surprised, put down his work and ran to Clark. Where did you get your car? Jonathan stretched out his hand to wipe away the ominous premonition in his heart. When he got closer and looked at the textured lines of the red off-road vehicle and the brand new but mud-stained tires, Jonathan clearly, it might take him 100 years of farming to afford this car. Clark. Martha was worried about the quarrel between father and son, so she rushed to them. The three of them stood on the grass of the farm. Clark felt a little embarrassed and rubbed his hair. His eyes wandered and he said, well, a friend lent it to me. Clark. Jonathan frowned and stared at Clark. He watched the child grow up with his own eyes. Jonathan could tell at a glance that Clark was lying. He lowered his voice and said, I want to hear the truth. Seeing that he couldn't hide it, Clark had no choice but to put down the arm that was scratching his hair, took a deep breath, and stared into Jonathan's eyes. Okay, this car is a gift from Gino. Sure enough. Jonathan sighed in his heart, and his suspicion in his heart came true. Martha raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, is it because you saved Lex Luthor's life that his brother gave you this big guy? That's right, Clark said to Martha excitedly. Mom, the performance of this car is very superior. Our family needs this car. It can help us transport goods and reduce the financial burden on the family. Clark. Before Clark could finish speaking, Jonathan immediately interrupted Clark. The middle-aged man frowned and said seriously, I know you want this car very much, but you can't accept it. But this is their thank you gift. Clark frowned. It's just a car, Dad. Clark didn't know why his father was so stubborn. It's something that both parties want to do, but Jonathan wants to stop it. Because you saved his life, you can accept his thank you gift with peace of mind. Jonathan crossed his arms and looked serious. What about next time? Clark, what if you save someone else's life next time, but they don't? What if I didn't give you something in return? What would you think? That's not what I had in mind. Clark pursed his lips. But human nature is like this. Jonathan stared at Clark. You can't guarantee whether your emotions will be affected. Kindness should not be sought in return, Clark. But it's just a piece of cake for the Luthor family. Father. Clark couldn't understand Jonathan's thinking. He argued rationally. Do you know what Gino is wearing? The clothes he is wearing don't even have brands, they are all custom fit. He is handsome and rich. I can guarantee that 99% of the girls in school like him. The other party just sent a car, which is not expensive to the Luthor family. It is even like sending a water glass. Looking at the emotional Clark, Jonathan sighed, but still insisted on his bottom line. He slowly shook his head and said, I'm sorry, Clark. I know you are unhappy. This is normal. After all, children of your age want to the RIA SA car, Listening to Jonathan's words, Clark took a deep breath, stared at his father and said, "So I can't accept this gift, right?" Jonathan did not back down and nodded. "I'm afraid that's the case." "Okay, then I'll smash it." Clark threw away the school bag behind him and appeared in front of the off-road vehicle in an instant. He raised his fist and imitated Gino's behavior in the morning and punched the hood of the off-road vehicle. "Stop it, Clark." Jonathan was shocked and hurriedly stepped forward to stop Clark's reckless behavior. But how could Jonathan's speed compare to the speed of the son of Krypton? Before Jonathan could take a few steps, Clark's fist landed on the hood. Bang! The fist hit the iron sheet with strong wind, and the terrifying force made the hood make a tooth-breaking sound. The originally flat front of the car was dented to a degree visible to the naked eye, with a fist imprinted on the iron sheet. The originally beautiful front of the car was twisted and convex as if it had been in a car accident. Clark. Martha was also frightened by Clark's actions. She shouted to Clark in panic, "Child, don't do this." Whoosh! It seemed that some parts in the car were damaged, and some black smoke floated out from the hood and into the air. Hoo-hoo! After venting his anger a little, Clark found some peace in his originally angry heart, but when he saw the worried eyes of his parents, Clark couldn't help but loosen his fists. "I refused Gino at first, but he said that if I didn't want it, he would throw it away." Clark glanced at Jonathan angrily. "So I fulfilled your wish, father." After saying this, Clark turned around and ran towards the outside of the farm. "Clark." Jonathan hesitated to speak. Clark ignored the shouts behind him and ran faster. Now he just wants to be quiet. Luther Castle. Pa bang bang. The crisp sound echoed in the castle hall. Two figures wearing visors and holding rapiers kept trying to attack. The rapiers in their hands were waving, intertwined and collided with each other, making crisp sounds. The sound of steel clashing echoed through the hall. The tall figure on the right moved swiftly and fiercely, and the other petite figure was forced to defend with a sword as it was pressed forward by a torrential attack. "Master." The old butler was holding a tray in one hand and holding the other behind his back. He had impeccable manners and stood at the entrance of the hall with unhurried steps. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there is a boy outside the castle who claims to be your high school classmate and wants to see you." "High school classmates?" A dull voice came from under the visor. "What's your name?" As he spoke, the tall figure turned his head to avoid the sharp sword stabbed at the throat by the petite figure, swung the sword away with his backhand, and once again entered the fierce battle. The old butler said calmly, "The other party calls himself Clark Kent." Gino was a little distracted and murmured, "Clark. This is a rare visitor." However, in fencing, any tiny mistake can be fatal. "Ha!" The petite figure obviously seized this opportunity. She gave a low shout, and with her right hand holding the sword, she suddenly used force to swing away the long sword that was pressing on the sword. Then she pointed the long sword at Gino's throat with a typical thrusting movement. The situation changes rapidly, and the outcome is only a matter of millimeters. The game ended and Gino lost. "Well, it's just over." Gino took off his visor, with an unconcerned expression on his face. He smiled and gave a thumbs up to his opponent. "Great progress, Annie." The figure opposite also took off his visor, revealing a delicate and pure face, with long hair on both sides wetted by sweat and sticking to his cheeks. Hearing Gino's praise, the little maid nodded reservedly and straightened her slender waist. The girl walked towards Gino and took over the sword and visor. Gino took the milk on the butler's tray, took a sip and said, "Let him in." "Prepare the dinner by the way." Gino snapped his fingers. "I want to treat this friend to a banquet." The old butler nodded. "Your wish, young master." The midday wind blew the green grass in front of Luther Castle, and green vines clung to the walls. Clark, who was waiting in front of the castle gate, stared blankly at the green vines on the wall. He didn't understand why things turned out like this. Not far away, an old man's calm voice interrupted Clark's thoughts. "Mr. Clark, welcome to Luther Castle." "Hello." Clark came back to his senses. The old butler opened the iron door and led Clark into the castle. Stepping on the cracked stone steps and walking along the road full of flowers on both sides, when Clark stepped into the main hall of the castle, looking at the luxurious furniture full of history around him, especially the heavy-looking expensive chandeliers above his head, he couldn't help but feel somewhat emotional. A voice sounded from behind Clark, introducing Clark. Ah, an old object from the 18th century, a collection of the ancestors of the Luther family. Gino patted Clark on the shoulder, and the system prompts were constantly playing in his mind. A negative emotions from Clark +50, +50. You seem to be in a bad mood. Gino led Clark to the long dining table. The maids pulled out the chairs and let Clark sit at the table opposite Gino. Is it so obvious? Clark rubbed his cheek, looking disappointed. Gino chuckled. You almost have the word, I am unhappy, written all over your face. But don't be sad, Clark. My father said that good food and beautiful people can relieve sadness. Although you can't enjoy the beauty, you can enjoy the delicious food. Gino said, then picked up a bottle of red wine on the table and handed it to Clark. This is a good friend. He takes the initiative to come to your door and give you points. Gino smiled and pointed to the red wine bottle in Clark's hand. You can blow on the bottle. Clark frowned and said, well, shouldn't you drink from a red wine glass? Isn't that how you rich people drink? Use a wine glass, Gino said with a disdainful smile on his face. Don't listen to those guys' farts. Rich people can drink whatever they want. Clark raised the bottle and poured it into his mouth as if he understood. The slightly spicy smell of alcohol made Clark, who was exposed to alcohol for the first time, couldn't help but frown. At this time, the kitchen had prepared dishes, and several swaying blonde maids walked into the hall dignifiedly holding silver plates. Pieces of delicious food were placed in front of Gino and Clark. Gino picked up a fork and stuck it into a piece of meat. The red-orange soup flowed down the meat. Gino raised the fork and introduced to Clark, French pan-fried chicken. Dice onions and basil leaves, mix with diced matsutake and mushrooms, add cherry tomatoes to add texture and pour over the fried chicken breasts, then simmer over low heat for 10 minutes before serving. It's smooth and tender in the mouth, without losing the spiciness of onions. It's my favorite delicacy. Listening to Gino's introduction, Clark was also a little greedy. He swallowed, picked up the knife and fork on the table, picked up a piece and put it into his mouth. Clark chewed carefully, his dull eyes suddenly lit up, and he mumbled while chewing the meat, it's delicious. While the two were eating delicious food, they would toast each other and taste red wine from time to time. As the saying goes, there are 3 ways to bring men closer together: carrying a gun together, drinking together, and... In short, as time went by, Clark drank the red wine in his stomach and gradually fermented. Even though he had an extraordinary physique, Clark felt a little bit drunk. Taking advantage of the strength of the wine, Clark put down the knife and fork in his hand and looked at the table in distress. Gino opposite. Gino, why do you think my parents can't understand me? Gino raised his eyebrows slightly, raised a smile on his lips, and asked tentatively, is it because of Uncle Jonathan? He doesn't want you to accept gifts from the Luther family. Clark nodded. That's right. He rubbed his eyebrows, his eyes full of distress. It's like there is a huge gap between us. Gino smiled, put down his knife and fork as well, flicked his finger to instruct the maids to remove the desserts for dinner, stared at Clark and said, this is normal, Clark. Did you know? Gino sighed and said, when I showed powerful abilities when I was a child, my parents spent 4 years taking me to many mysterious places to explore the abnormalities in me. They thought I was possessed by some demon, but I'm more inclined to think it was a gift. Gino stared at Clark with burning eyes and said, it's a gift from God. Of course, because of the 4-year delay, I went to high school when I was supposed to go to college. The maids brought desserts. Gino picked up a macaron with his hand and threw it into his mouth. He stretched out a hand and shook it, expressing his thoughts to Clark. Sometimes, maybe you should communicate more with your father. I can tell he loves you. Just like my parents. Gino held his chin with his hands, with a smile in his eyes. But because he was too worried about you, his love put a lot of pressure on you. Chapter 21. Near evening, Clark left the castle. Before leaving, Gino's words were still echoing in his mind, go tell him how you feel. Not long after Clark left, the sound of a sports car engine sounded outside the manor. Lex, dressed in a suit and ties, walked into the hall expressionlessly. Butler, prepare some food for me. While Lex was giving instructions to the housekeeper, he glanced at Gino, who was lying on the sofa. Lex rolled his eyes angrily. My stupid brother, so who won the bet? Hearing Lex's words, Gino narrowed his eyes and said, "Strictly speaking, I won." Gino stood up, picked up the bun on the table and threw it into his mouth. The Kent family did not return the car. After listening to Gino's words, Lex thought for a moment and roughly guessed the method Gino used. He stared at the smiling Gino and said, "Oh, you took advantage of Clark's pride. Others may not know it, but Lex understands Jonathan Kent's stubbornness. The other party didn't give them any face at all on the river bank. And if you want the Kent family to take over the car, naturally you can only start with Clark." Gino sighed. Absolutely. He even had a big quarrel with his father because of it. But, as long as the result is good, then it's okay. Lex was silent for a moment and shook his head. "Perhaps you are more suitable than me to take over the family business and become a qualified seed master." As he spoke, Lex took out a note from his pocket and handed it to Gino. "This is..." Gino took the note from Lex's hand and looked at his brother with blue eyes full of expectation. Lex rolled his eyes angrily. "This is the trading website of the killers in the underground world, and it is also your reward for winning the bet." Seeing Gino taking away the note with a smile, Lex frowned and warned, "However, I need to remind you not to do anything stupid, Gino. Especially don't expose yourself." Gino shrugged, imitating the posture of a U.S. Marine Corps soldier, and saluted Lex loosely, "Sir, yes sir." After saying that, without waiting for the sullen Lex to curse, Gino held the note and jumped up to the second floor of the stairs. After returning to his room and starting up the computer, Gino entered the URL on the note into the browser. As the network buffer loaded, soon, a brief network interface came into Gino's eyes through the cold and slightly dazzling computer screen. This is a very simple web page with no cumbersome advertisements and only two options, one black and one red, on the front page of the website. Scavenger, or hirer. Gino controlled the mouse and clicked on the latter. As the options were confirmed, the page was quickly refreshed again, and a long list of fill-in-the-blank options popped up. Task type: assassination, theft. Gino did not hesitate and chose the second option. Describe the mission objective and transaction location in detail. Gino thought for a while, then entered the mission address and the necklace around the target person's neck into the task bar. Fill in the task remuneration, and the website will post it on the scavenger forum for you, and the platform will extract 1% of the intermediary fee. Looking at the transaction pricing interface, Gino frowned slightly, and after thinking about it, he set the task reward at $50,000. Although kryptonite is very important to him, Gino does not intend to price it too high to attract unnecessary attention. If it is too low, no one will take up the task. So after thinking about it, $50,000 is an appropriate figure. After setting the price, the computer pops up a list of payment accounts again and requires 5 minutes to complete the remittance. Gino took out his mobile phone and arranged for the staff at his bank to transfer $50,000 to the designated card number with just one call. 2 minutes later, the page refreshed again, and a prompt, "The task has been released for you, please wait patiently," popped up. After doing this, Gino controlled the computer to return to the main page, and then selected the scavenger option. He was a little curious, what pages did those killers see? The page refreshes again. Soon, a page similar to an online forum popped into Gino's field of vision. The tasks at the top were marked in red and bold. Gino glanced at them a few times and couldn't help but laugh. Mission: assassinate Lord Eagle Sauce. Target bounty: $10 million. $10 million to buy a lord's life. Gino smacked his lips. Isn't the life of this great lord worth much? But then I thought about how the big lords were just puppets pushed out by big companies, and 10 million seemed too much. This mission is purely to disgust Yingjong. Gino concluded with gloating. When he saw the killer's comment below, the smile on Gino's face became even wider. Anonymous A. Shet, I'm sure the guy who issued this mission must be an Arab. Anonymous B. I support someone taking over this task to kill that old puppet who often talks nonsense on TV. Gino controlled the mouse to slide down again and found that there were various tasks here. Among them was, $500,000 to assassinate my 80-year-old husband. A reward of 200,000 yuan is offered for information on commercial secrets of Amos de Company. It can only be said that in the scavenger forum, the evil of human nature is vividly displayed. The few tasks that Gino saw just now were even innocuous tasks. The more terrifying and unspeakable tasks made Gino silent after reading them. Well, despicability and nobleness have always been twin brothers in human nature. They sit at two ends of the scale. When one end decreases, the other end will only continue to increase until the scale is unbalanced and falls towards one extreme. Exhaling a breath, Gino slowly turned off the computer. Don't know when someone will take over your task. At the same time, Gino turned off the computer and fell asleep. In a hotel somewhere far away in the metropolis, countless gun parts were scattered on the ground, and eaten pizza boxes were piled up in a hill. At the same time, empty wine bottles on the ground showed that the residents of this hotel seemed to be particularly fond of alcohol. An unshaven middle-aged man touched his chin. He leaned back on his chair and browsed the scavenger website with his fingers unconsciously sliding the mouse. He held a wine bottle in one hand and took a sip from time to time. Are you going to snatch the necklace from a girl's neck and get revenge from a little kid who doesn't love you? The middle-aged man ate the melon with great interest and shouted behind him without looking back, Slade, what are you going to do? Don't go grab a necklace, you can get $50,000. Not far behind the man, a tall figure sat beside the bed, holding a magazine in his big hand and loading bullets into it. A low voice came from the corner. Oh, too little, a waste of time. After loading the bullet, the figure stood up slowly. He walked slowly towards the light, and the shadow gradually faded away, revealing a strong body full of scars and a right eye covered by a mask. His assistant said enthusiastically, So what were you doing when you were 16? Do you have a high school crush on a girl? The man picked up two samurai swords on the ground and wiped the blood. He stared at the cold and reflective blades expressionlessly and said, Holly, I joined the army and killed people when I was 16. His name is Lex, and at the same time, there is also a famous name in the mercenary world, Death Knell. Calm and distant on the endless sea. Rough and rolling waves crash against the strangely shaped rocks. This is a huge island with countless towering buildings similar to medieval Tang dynasty houses. Waves of guys in black samurai uniforms started a day of hard training by waving their sharp blades before dawn. And in the tallest building on the island, in a dark room, several samurai swords hanging quietly on the wall add a sense of solemnity to the style of the house. Whoa 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 whoa. The sound of warm water echoed in the bathroom. Blocked by a gauze curtain, a graceful figure was washing her body from bottom to top. The water flowed down the smooth collarbone and splashed into the bathtub from top to bottom, causing some tiny waves. Snapped. As if she had finished her morning bath, the woman turned off the shower, opened the gauze curtain, and then gently stepped out of the bathtub with a pair of beautiful legs that were round, tight, yet straight and slender. The fingers of the little feet are painted with black nail polish. Those beautiful and small toes gently tapped on the expensive carpet. Miss. The maid who had been waiting outside the bathroom obediently handed over the heated bath towel in her hand. From the corner of her eye, she glanced at the woman's tight, smooth white back. She couldn't help but admire God's preference for this woman again. It seemed that all the good and perfect things were added to her body embellishment. The woman's small hand swept over the undulating peaks. She opened her red lips lightly, and her voice was low and elegant, with a hint of majesty. Where is Dad? She wrapped herself in a bathrobe and walked towards the full-length mirror in the bedroom with light steps. The long, smooth black hair, the delicate and perfect face, the high bridge of the nose and the slightly thin red lips together constitute a charming beauty in the world. But the pair of cold and ruthless green eyes reflected in the mirror made her temperament even more cold and fierce, revealing the oppressive aura of the superior. This is undoubtedly a perfect woman. The combination of Asian and European looks gives her a bit of the subtle beauty of an Oriental woman and the charming enthusiasm of a Western woman. Half of her blood comes from her mother, and the other half comes from that old-fashioned Oriental man. The maid bowed her head respectfully and said, The leader is in the council chamber. Hearing the maid's words, Talia raised her pretty cheeks, revealing her slightly pointed chin, and a sneer came from her mouth. He is still like that, clinging to the old-fashioned tradition and not letting go. As she spoke, the woman opened the closet. Unlike other women, her wardrobe is all black clothes. Talia took out a set of black training clothes and put them on, which made her figure look more curvy. Talia walked out of the house, walking silently and steadily through the ancient corridors. 18 years of training and cultivation have turned her into an excellent assassin. Soon, with the passing assassins bowing their heads respectfully, Talia walked down the tall building and stood outside a hollowed-out cold cave near the seaside of the island. "Chief," Talia called in a calm tone, but her pretty face was full of ridicule. Her old-fashioned father did not even allow her to call him in the organization. Talia secretly hates, just because he feels that I am a woman and cannot shoulder the important task of leading the Assassin's League. While thinking about it, a desolate and hoarse voice sounded from outside the cave, "Come in." Talia took a deep breath and stepped into the cave. There was no light in the dark and deep cave, and only the faint smell of incense floating in the air made Talia's mind peaceful. Her beautiful green eyes stared deep into the cave entrance. Under the weak fuel lamp, a thin old man with black hair wearing a green robe and cold eyes was sitting on a futon. When he saw Talia, the old man's expression remained unchanged, as if he was just an ordinary member of the organization. "What are you doing here?" The old man raised his eyes, his brown eyes flashing with brilliance. He stared into Talia's eyes, waiting for the other party's answer. Talia got straight to the point. She hated this rigid old man. "Chief, I think I'm ready to carry out my first mission." Talia raised her right hand and slowly clenched it, making a brittle sound. "After 18 years of hard training and fighting, my skills have been tempered to the peak, and my blood is roaring. I am ready to carry out the noble purposes of the League." "Really?" The old man listened to Talia's words, glanced at Talia, waved his hand indifferently and said, "Then you can choose any task from the underground website to do." That was your graduation mission at that time. The man's attitude was as casual as ever, and he didn't care about Talia's affairs. As he said that, the old man slowly closed his eyes again, and the intimidating power in his eyes disappeared, and he once again became an ordinary old man. Looking at the old man with his eyes closed tightly, Talia bit her lips tightly, and even a little blood slipped down the corners of her lips because she was too hard. Talia took a deep breath and lowered her head. "Your wish." After saying this, the woman turned and left, but looking at her speed that she wanted to run, it could be seen that she was in a bad mood. Talia quickly returned to her house. The moment she gently closed the door, her pretty cheeks were instantly filled with rage. "Old thing," Talia roared, lifting the katana on the table and slashing the tables and chairs in the room, venting her anger. Obviously that man is his father, but he has never recognized himself, just because he is a woman. Lars al Ghul, you can also call him Lei Xiaogu, this old guy who has lived for countless years. It was decided that she could not lead the League of Assassins. Yes, this island is the famous Assassin's League base. From the fall of Rome to many major historical events, the League of Assassins can be seen in them. And Talia al Ghul is the daughter of Lei Xiaogu, the daughter of the great leader of the Assassin Alliance. However, this identity never made Talia proud. Her father never regarded her as a relative, but more like a stranger. Talia took a deep breath, straightening her chest and rising and falling slightly. "Oh, I will get the Assassin's League sooner or later, Lei Xiaogu, just wait." The firm belief ignited in her heart made Talia restrain her anger. She stepped towards the computer and stared at the computer screen with her cold eyes. Talia decided to choose a simple mission to start with. "I need to find an easy assignment." Talia flipped the mouse, and soon, the mouse arrow landed on a post. "Take the gem necklace from Lana Blue, a freshman at Smallville High School in Kansas, and place it under the third large locust tree in the town cemetery." A necklace. Talia raised the corners of her beautiful eyes and raised her lips with a hint of mockery, a story about a teenage brat's revenge. Talia moved the mouse and clicked to confirm. "This mission is interesting." Talia's eyes were haughty, her left leg resting on her right leg, her thigh without a trace of fat swaying slightly, but deep down in her heart, she had the idea of enjoying the fun. "I took it. Saturday is the happiest day of the week for office workers and students. However, for those employees of Juju Lufu News who have to work overtime on Saturday, Saturday is a painful torture." Saturday was also an extraordinary day for the town. Because the town's trade market opens every Saturday, some farmers and craftsmen sell their products at the town market. At the current market, countless stalls have been set up, with their own crops placed on the shelves, and some clever vendors are pushing carts to sell drinks and snacks. Gino was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt, accompanied by Chloe and little Black Pete. Every time I come here, it feels very lively. Chloe fiddled with her camera, pressing the shutter on some children running and playing from time to time. It's unique, Gino replied smoothly, lowering his head to fiddle with the buttons on his cell phone, staring at the screen of the cell phone. It was an anonymous email, sent by the scavenger website. The content on it was very simple, like, "The delivery man has arrived at the store." The email showed that the killer had set off. At this time, Peter, who had a sharp eye, quickly spotted an acquaintance in the crowd. "Hey, that's Clark's stall." Gino raised his head and looked in the direction of Xiaohei's finger. "I saw Jonathan and his wife standing at a vegetable stall not far away." Clark, expressionless, was carrying boxes of goods from his family's old pickup truck. Looking at the stern-faced Clark, Gino chuckled. It seemed that his enlightenment that day had no effect, but that's right. Adolescent boys are inherently rebellious, and whether they accept gifts or not, it can't be said that Clark was wrong. "Want to go over and take a look?" Chloe glanced at Gino cautiously. Gino noticed Chloe's eyes, smiled and patted the girl's shoulder, and picked up an emerald red apple from the vendor stall with his other hand. "Past, let me forget it. Mr. Jonathan doesn't like me." Gino shook his head. He was not a psychopath like Lex, who would run over to say hello to people who hated him. "Hey, my apples." The vendor's eyes widened as he watched the brightest apple in his stall being picked away. Gino ignored the vendor and threw $100 at the old man's stall. The vendor, who was originally mumbling, immediately changed his face to a flattering one. "How many more, young man?" "Pack some of the rest and I'll take it back. This apple is quite sweet. Take it back and give it to Lex to have a taste." The three of them stopped in front of the fruit stall. At this time, a cold and deep voice sounded behind them. "Give way." Gino stepped out of the way with his right leg, and a short young man with hair that covered his eyes and carrying a worn canvas bag hurried past the three of them. When he passed by Gino, the man glanced at Gino with a little hatred from the corner of his eye. Although his movements were small, Gino was still keenly aware of the man's malicious eyes under his thick lenses. Gently waving his hand to dispel the strange smell left by the young man as he passed by, Gino frowned at the man and looked at Peter and Chloe with a puzzled look on his face. Who is that guy? Gino remembered that he had never offended this person, right? What's that look in his eyes? He really thinks that he is not a member of the family. Do you believe that this guy will not be able to see the sun tomorrow? And in school, except for Whitney and Watt, who took the initiative to find trouble and were punished, he never used his power to bully others. Chloe looked at the leaving figure with strange eyes, shrugged and said, "The famous weird boy in the town." "Gray Ted." Xiaohei also came up to talk mysteriously. "I was a classmate with him in elementary school. That guy has been extremely interested in insects since he was a child. And he's withdrawn and unsociable." Chloe sighed and shook her head. "Before you came, that guy had been the target of bullying by Whitney's gang." "It's indeed strange." Gino nodded in agreement, his eyes falling on the canvas bag carried by the young man in the distance. The things inside gave him a familiar feeling of disgust. Gino spent a day playing with Chloe at the market. When we returned to the castle, the setting sun was already approaching the earth, and it was evening in the blink of an eye. When Gino walked into the castle, he saw his old brother sitting on the sofa with a serious face, and the table was filled with documents. "Bad mood?" Gino asked the maid to bring him a glass of milk and drank it. He sat next to Lex with a smile and patted the cheap guy on the shoulder. "What happened? Let me see." As he spoke, Gino picked up the documents on the table and after browsing them roughly, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. The annual financial report showed a 20% loss. "It seems that Dad will lay off you soon." "I know." Lex rolled his eyes angrily, then shook his head and said, "But I don't want to lay off employees. Those people have been working in Luther Enterprises for more than 10 years, and they can't find suitable jobs after leaving the enterprise." Gino raised his eyebrows, as if he was meeting Lex for the first time. He looked Lex up and down, and said jokingly, "Is this the same ruthless Lex I know?" "Of course, this is all a joke. My brother actually has kindness, but this kindness is often suppressed in his heart. However, you have to be careful about Dad, if he knows that you are not planning to lay off employees." Gino shrugged and gave Lex a wish-for-you look. "There is no such thing as kindness in their father," Lionel's life, and greed flows in his blood. Lex's expression was gloomy, and the light on his bald head seemed a little reflective. I understand. I see. Lana hung up the call with her boyfriend and opened her door. It was late at night and she wanted to go to bed. Lana, who was wearing light blue pajamas, stepped forward, her nightgown gently swinging up to lift up a pair of straight and round thighs under her skirt. The girl's wheat-like complexion gives people a healthy and energetic feeling. It is no wonder that she has become the dream girl of many boys in Smallville Town High School. Compared with the pink and white skin color favored by the East, Americans prefer wheatish skin color. The girl's boudoir is more cartoon style, with a small, carefully dressed box quietly placed on the sheets of a pink cartoon cat. This is. Lana walked towards the box curiously. She didn't know where the box came from. Maybe it was a surprise arranged by Whitney before she went home. Thinking in her heart, Lana opened the packaging box with dexterous hands. The next second, as the box was opened, countless beautiful and colorful butterflies flapped their wings and flew around. The beautiful scene made Lana's originally plain face reveal a happy look, and the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Wow, this is so beautiful. Lana admired sincerely, watching the butterflies dancing with them. And as the sight zooms out, on a big tree with a crooked neck not far from Lana's white villa, a stooped figure was squatting on the trunk without any form. He was holding a camera and facing Lana's room on the second floor of the White House. Seeing the girl's happy smile, the young man also made a lewd, hee-hee, sound in his throat. The night is falling, and the cold wind is blowing. In the dark and quiet forest, there are only a few insects walking around and making a rustling sound on the leaves. On the thick trunk of the crooked neck tree. Oh, let me take a good look at you, beautiful Lana, my goddess, my favorite. Gray, who wears glasses and has greasy hair, murmured while adjusting the equipment so that the camera would zoom in and focus on the landscape of Lana's open chest in her blue pajamas. That Gino actually bullied you, but don't worry, I will definitely vent my anger on you. Oh, Lana, Lana. Gray looked obsessed, and slowly moved one arm towards his pants pocket. Just when he was about to start his daily craft work tonight, Lana in the room turned sideways and turned off the lights. Snapped. As the lights went out, the second floor of the villa fell into darkness and silence. Oh shit. Gray cursed angrily and had to take his hand out angrily. It seems I can only go back. Before the man could finish speaking to himself, a sharp wind sounded behind his ears. PFF'd. A hypnotic needle accurately penetrated Gray's neck. The sleeping potion in the needle caused him to fall into a coma and fall into a deep sleep, like a lifeless koala that fell to the ground. Snapped. The wretched and short Gray was like a dead dog thrown into the forest at night, his cheeks wet by the cold and watery leaves. Shaw. There was a sound in the bushes not far away, and a pair of soft and lightweight black ninja boots stepped lightly on the grass. With the help of the bright moonlight, the beautiful and delicate Talia stood quietly in the dense forest. Her hands with green manicure were placed on her waist, and her round and straight long legs wrapped in tight black pants added to her royal sisterly temperament. Tonight, she changed the outfit she wore on Alcatraz Island. She tied up her long black hair with a flower rope and a green hairpin to embellish her look. Her emerald green eyes stared at Gray, who was lying on the ground, as if staring at an indescribable pile of garbage. Disgusting guy, he can't be my employer, right? Talia looked down at the unconscious Gray, her slightly pointed chin slightly raised, her pretty little face full of disdain. But after taking a look at Gray's outfit, Talia quickly gave up this idea in her heart. Cheap clothes, a worn canvas bag, and a digital camera that has been used several times. Coupled with the sour smell that could be smelled even standing here, Talia didn't think this man could spend $50,000 to send out a mission. Forget it, I don't want to come to this barren town again. Talia's face was full of disgust. She put on a ninja hood to hide her face, and her green eyes were fixed on the target of this operation, the second floor of Lana's villa. Aha! Under the moonlight in the middle of the night, Talia moved very fast, like a dark afterimage passing towards Lana's house. The several-meter-high iron fence had no effect on Talia. She jumped lightly, and combined with the secret power-generating skills learned by the ancient martial arts family, she twisted her waist in the air like an elf in the dark night, and used the superhero kneels down on one knee in a perfect pose on the cold grass. Talia looked around to make sure no one noticed her infiltration, and then rushed towards the second floor of the villa again. Under the dense darkness of night, her movements were as quiet and deadly as a poisonous snake spitting its message. Talia silently came to the first floor of the villa and touched the hook around her waist with her little hands. Shwashua. Talia swung the hook rope, feeling the swing frequency of the hook rope getting faster and faster. Then, Talia gently threw it towards the second floor. Kacha. The end of the hook rope wrapped around the iron railing of the balcony. Talia yanked suddenly, tapped the wall with her feet and fell into the balcony. This perfect infiltration was not witnessed by anyone, and naturally there was no cheers or applause from others. The bright moon hit Talia's tall nose. Through the glass window, Talia's eyes looked at Lana, who was sleeping peacefully in the room with a complicated expression. At her age, she had already killed dozens of people. Call. Talia exhaled to clear away the distracting thoughts in her mind. The woman moved her small hand towards her waist, and a short black tube appeared in Talia's hand. She inserted the short pipe into the gap in the glass, then gently tapped the iron pipe with her fingers. Soon, some white crystal powder scattered and dissipated in the air. And Lana in the room soon heard a deeper breathing sound. After doing all this, Talia lowered her head and glanced at the glass door lock. The woman took out the green hairpin from her black hair. This hairpin is not only for decoration, the sharp spikes on the top of the hairpin can also be used for unlocking and killing people. Talia inserted the hairpin into the keyhole, gently shook it in. Kacha. The locked door opened, and Talia stepped gently into this cute-style room with elegant steps. Looking at Lana on the bed, her eyes swept across Lana's collarbone, and Talia did not notice the necklace her employer wanted. So, Talia looked at the room again, ignoring the doll pillows and a drawer of love letters. Talia quickly found what she wanted on the bedside table. A fluorescent green gemstone necklace exudes green luster in the dark room. This stone. Talia frowned slightly and took a few steps closer to hold the stone. The hard stone was cold to the touch, but even Talia, who was well informed, could not tell the type of stone. Is it onyx, or is it whatever this thing is? The woman's sixth sense told Talia that things were not that simple. Because the green luster that shines from time to time on the stone is as magnificent as the magic gems in fairy tales, this successfully aroused Talia's curiosity. She stared at the stone quietly, and a bold plan quietly came into her mind. She wanted to know why her employer wanted to get the necklace. Thinking in her heart, Talia put the necklace back on her blouse and quietly returned to the villa. After taking away the mission target, the necklace, Talia had a dull expression. She didn't feel that this was something with a sense of accomplishment. For a top killer who has been trained for 18 years, the difficulty of this task is as simple as breathing. After passing through the dense forest, Talia got into a rugged black off-road vehicle. Of course she didn't just come to the town. She had made all preparations before coming here. Talia started the vehicle, then drove to the town cemetery, and successfully found the third large locust tree at the entrance of the cemetery. Bury the necklace under the big locust tree. Talia took out her mobile phone and logged into the website, then sent a delivery reminder to the employer. After doing all this, Talia returned to the car. She drove the car farther away and then headed back the same way. The woman hid herself behind a bush and used the breath-holding technique of the League of Assassins to control the body's heartbeat and breathing. Soon, the femme fatale gradually merged with the night. Talia stared at the locust tree and said quietly in her heart, "Next, all we need to do is wait." Time passed by minute by minute. Soon, roughly 10 minutes later, an off-road vehicle slowly stopped at the entrance of the cemetery. The butler, wearing a suit and leather shoes, with his hair combed meticulously, stepped out of the car, holding a lead box in his hand, and walked step by step towards the third large locust tree. Talia saw the old man's figure. Her eyes were locked on the old man, and she secretly thought in her heart, could it be this old guy? Luther Castle is quiet and mysterious late at night. In the early hours of the morning, the servants had already rested and the lights were turned off. There is only silence in the huge castle. An off-road vehicle parked quietly outside the iron gate, and the old housekeeper walked into the castle step by step, holding the lead box in his hands. The elegant old man did not notice the dark shadow flashing behind him. He walked through the quiet hall, his leather shoes making a slight click sound on the oak stairs. The old housekeeper came to the second floor and immediately walked to the room on the left near the balcony. Young master. The old housekeeper stretched out his finger and knocked lightly on the door. A lazy voice came from inside. Come in. The old housekeeper gently opened the door. The lights were not turned on in this room. In the dark night, Gino was lying on the bed wearing short sleeves. Seeing the old housekeeper's arrival, he stood up from the bed with a smile. Did you bring the things? Yes. Gino pointed to the table. Put it on the table, you can go and have a rest. The old butler put down the lead box and turned to leave. Crack. The door closed, and Gino also stepped towards the lead box. He gently lifted the lead box with his right hand. The green gem inside exuded a deep luster, and Gino's cheeks gradually turned pale as the gem necklace illuminated it. Weak, powerless, like a dehydrated fish. Kryptonite. Gino's expression was complicated, and he suppressed his weakness and closed the lead box with a snap. The lead box blocks the influence of kryptonite, and the feeling of exhaustion leaves people. Putting the kryptonite gently on the table, there was an unusual sound in his ears. The sound was inaudible, but for Gino, who had extraordinary talent, he still heard it. Interesting. A smile appeared on Gino's lips, and his eyes turned to the wall at the end of the bed. Outside was the rooftop of his house, which was suitable for hiding people. Is the killer sent by the killer website curious about this? Or do you plan to take advantage of others? Gino shook his neck and made a crackling sound. Obviously, I asked the old housekeeper to drive around the neighborhood a few more times before he came back, but he still didn't get rid of this tale. Gino's expression was calm and he slowly walked towards the wall where the sound was coming from. As the distance got closer and closer, with a wall separating him, Gino took a deep breath and held his breath. Focus on the ears. Gino tilted his head slightly and slowly closed his eyes. Breathe, breathe, and with the mind silent, everything around you seems to have pressed the pause button. The sound of wind slowly sounded in my ears. He heard it. Heard it. The cold wind at night hit the glass, blowing through the cracks and making a whistling sound. Next door Lex was snoring deafeningly. In the maid's room downstairs, several awake maids were discussing their future partners. However, among these sounds, there was a slow and steady heartbeat. And the owner of this heartbeat was only separated from Gino by a wall at this moment. Sure enough, after thoroughly confirming that he was being followed, Gino put a smile on his face. He gently stretched out his right hand to make a fist, then curled his index finger and tapped the phalanges against the cold wall. Da da da. The sound of silence echoed, and Gino heard the heartbeat speeding up slightly and then calming down quickly. It seemed that the other party didn't realize that he had discovered her. This killer is confident in his abilities. Laughing in his heart, the boy knocked on the wall and said in a chant-like tone, little pig, let me in quickly. Little pig, let me in quickly. Outside the house. The cold wind blew on Talia, and the excellent killer silently listened to what was going on in the house. Long before coming here, Talia, who was well informed, recognized the Luther family crest hanging on this castle. This is a line from The Three Little Pigs. Talia's memory flashed in her mind. When she was a child, her mother once told this story to herself. Talia's eyes flashed with disdain, and the corner of her mouth curled up with a hint of sarcasm. I didn't expect that the direct heir of the Luther family would be a fool who likes fairy tales. There was some disappointment in her heart, but Talia heard the voice chant again. You took the hair on your chin and swore never to open the door. Talia remained silent, and silently branded the youngest son of the Luther family as a fool in her heart. The voice was silent for a moment, and then the chant-like tone gradually became lower. I'll hit it hard. Smash it harder. Smash your house down. Talia even heard a ferocious tone in this voice. What does he want to do? Is he a psychopath? Talia frowned and fell silent in her own thoughts. She didn't realize she was exposed. She had the most powerful breath-holding technique and the best hiding technique in the world. But at this moment, bang, the thick cement wall shattered suddenly, and a fist suddenly smashed the wall, leaving a gap the size of a bowl in the solid wall. What? Talia's eyes widened, and a sense of absurdity grew in her heart. Could it be that my eyes are dazzled? She actually saw a fist smashing through the solid concrete wall. Talia's heart was filled with surprise. She saw the arm slowly twisting, turning into a fist, and then like a sharp blade cutting soft tofu, the thick and powerful arm suddenly slashed from top to bottom. Crash! The cement wall was like paper, with countless fragments and debris flying in all directions. A gap half a meter wide suddenly penetrated. Before Talia could come to her senses. Snapped! A handsome face suddenly appeared in the gap in the wall. In the pitch-black darkness, that face looked slightly weird and mysterious, and his head turned slightly to the left. His blue eyes stared at Talia coldly, and his tone was faint, "Here comes Johnny." Ah! Seeing the face that suddenly flashed up, even though she had experienced countless assassinations and had high-end training in the system, Talia, who claimed to be an elite killer among the elite, couldn't help but let out a scream, and her slightly mean face was filled with fear. Negative emotion +5 from Talia al Ghul, +5. Boom. Gino pushed hard with both hands, causing the already dilapidated cement wall to collapse. The huge movement also disturbed other people in the castle. Countless lights come on to disperse the darkness. Noisy voices echoed in the castle. Under the bright moonlight, a tall and muscular figure looked down at Talia. The oppressive aura even made Talia hold her breath involuntarily. His handsome face was full of mockery. Gino stared at the green-eyed woman in front of him and uttered his first words when the two met, "Hello, little pig." Talia stared at Gino's body, which was filled with strength like steel, but she made a decisive decision in her heart. She had seen Gino's feat of breaking a cement wall with his bare hands. The cunning woman knew she was outmatched. "I have to feint to escape." Making a plan in her heart, Talia's eyes flashed with determination. The woman turned her hands over and pulled out two cold light daggers from her sleeves. Whoosh! Like a gust of cold wind, Talia rushed towards Gino quickly, and the two daggers struck towards Gino's throat and heart. But beyond Talia's expectation, the man just stood there without hiding. HMPH. The woman snorted coldly, and jumped up the moment she was about to approach Gino. Her long legs lightly stepped on the rooftop. With the help of the reaction force, Talia fell from the top. The howling wind blew in my ears. Talia raised her cheeks and stared at Gino, pursed her lips slightly, looked at Gino with eyes that looked at a fool, and also gave the first response when the two met, "Idiot." Midair, Talia had a proud smile on her face, and her green eyes were full of sarcasm. Even if Gino can crush hard cement with his bare hands and split the poured cement wall, so what? Talia was elated that her cleverness had allowed her to escape the danger. Gino stared at the woman who jumped off the castle. Several meters above the ground, Talia turned around like a graceful gymnast, and then landed in a perfect posture. Snapped. She opened her arms for balance and looked up at the blonde boy on the rooftop who was watching her expressionlessly. The young master of the Luther family, she wrote it down. Ah, Talia sneered, her hair blown by the strong wind sticking to her face. The woman stretched out her green-white fingers and gently smoothed her length, then leaned down elegantly, as if she was paying tribute to the referee, or bowing slightly like an actor at the end of the curtain. Goodbye, idiots. Talia didn't intend to stay. There were more and more people around her, and the people in this castle were waking up. He looked deeply at Gino again, as if he wanted to imprint the other person's appearance in his mind. After saying this, she no longer hesitated, turned around and ran towards the dense forest. Breathing in and out, with every breath, Talia used the secret skills of the Assassin League to continuously increase her speed, which was fast enough to make runners ashamed. At the same time, Gino's door was slammed open. Lex was holding a stabbing sword in his left hand and an American eye in his right hand. Gino, what happened? Lex roared and rushed towards Gino. His bald head looked gloomy, his eyes were full of anger, and his eyes scanned the messy room. It wasn't until he saw Gino standing on the rooftop safe and sound that Lex breathed a sigh of relief. The nervous look on the bald face disappeared, and he regained his calm and domineering attitude. Lex walked to Gino's side with his rapier in hand, turned to look at his brother's side face, and sneered, "My stupid brother, what happened?" Gino stared quietly at the afterimage that gradually disappeared into the night. The guy who can make the system report points seems to be a famous villain. Gino's eyes became more and more profound. This was a good time to harvest points, and fear would be his weapon to harvest points. Implementing the next plan in his mind, Gino shook his head and replied, "A curious cat sneaked onto my balcony." Well, Keep applying fear and despair to harvest points until the last value is squeezed out of her and then kicked away, just like what my father's personal trainer taught me when I was a child, make the best use of everything. Ah, Lex threw away the stabbing sword in his hand, looked down at the figure sneaking into the dense forest in the distance, murderous intent flashed in his eyes, turned to look at Gino and said, "Tell me the bounty mission you posted, and I will handle it." Quote. He actually wanted to harm Gino, and Lex was already planning to use his money power to send this killer to hell. No need. Gino refused coldly. Under Lex's gaze, Gino slowly stepped onto the balcony fence and said in an unquestionable tone, "I will handle this matter myself." Aha! The next second, the boy jumped lightly and left the balcony. In the night sky, the tall figure fell straight towards the ground. The howling wet and cold night wind was easily broken by the steel-filled body. Boom! The figure fell to the ground with a crash, and then a large amount of dust was thrown up. The vast earth seemed to be wailing. As the night wind swept away the smoke and dust, two deep pits appeared in the originally flat grassland. It seemed that what fell was not a person but a ferocious Type 88 main battle tank. At this moment, many servants in the manor witnessed this scene with their own eyes using flashlights. Many people suddenly widened their eyes as if they had seen God. Oh my God, the young master actually jumped down from the second floor of the castle. That deep pit. God, you said it was caused by a missile explosion and I want to believe it, but it turned out to be caused by one person. Is he Jesus? Ignoring the noise of the crowd, Gino knew that his brother would make these people rot in their stomachs about what they saw tonight. And now, all he has to do is catch up with that woman and complete his plan. Run. Gino spat out one word, his eyes full of mockery. This was going to be an interesting hunt. How far can you run? After the words fell, Gino's legs suddenly exerted force. Boom! The already deep crater once again seemed to have been bombarded by artillery shells, creating an even bigger crater. But Gino's figure disappeared in an instant. People could only see an extremely fast afterimage disappearing from their sight. Only the flowers and plants that kept shaking along the way showed that something weird had passed by at a terrifying speed. In the dense forest, Talia kept running, adjusting her breathing and thinking about tonight's events. What's so weird about that stone? Talia was puzzled in her heart, and her agile posture kept avoiding the trees blocking the road. Besides, when did such a monster appear in the Luther family? While Talia was thinking, boom, two deafening explosions came from behind. What happens? Talia frowned and subconsciously turned her head to look behind her. Just for a moment, a figure flashed across Talia's field of vision like a ghost. What? Talia was shocked. She seemed to have seen a person appear in her field of vision just now. No, absolutely impossible. Talia bit her teeth lightly. This is definitely my eyesight. Perhaps because she felt she was too nervous, Talia also adjusted her breathing rate. Talia gently twisted her long, snow-white neck like a swan. Aha! Before Talia could turn around, the sound of rushing wind sounded in her ears. Snapped. A big steel hand suddenly pinched the woman's delicate neck, and then shook her hard like throwing garbage. The terrifying force struck, and Talia couldn't even control her body. The powerful force made her fly several meters in the air like a football. Bang! His body hit a towering old tree hard, causing the branches and leaves to sway and fall down. Several wet leaves fell down. The raven that was disturbed and resting on the tree let out an unpleasant cry and fluttered its wings across the night sky, adding a bit of horror to the silent night. Ahem! Talia knelt on the cold, wet earth. Her internal organs felt burning pain as if they were out of place. The woman's beautiful facial features were distorted, her red lips looked even paler, and a little blood overflowed from the corners of her lips. That moment just now hurt me very badly. A lazy and playful voice sounded in my ears, and the voice came from not far away. What? You just finished your bow and ran away before the referee scored. This is not a qualified actor. Talia held back the pain of vomiting blood and raised her head with difficulty, looking up ahead with a pair of eyes filled with resentment. Under the bright moonlight, a blond boy leaned gently against a crooked tree, with a sarcastic smile on his face, but his eyes were as cold as ice. You are so brave. Death, what a terrifying word. It represents the death of the body, the end of life, the end of the story. It makes people awe and fear, and it is a demon that the rich and powerful avoid. It is a scythe that is fair to all. Talia had always felt that death was far away from her, until tonight, when she saw the boy approaching her step by step, the death that rushed towards her was so close. What kind of monster are you? Talia spat out the blood in her mouth and stood up slowly with one arm on her waist. Every part of her body was in burning pain. Talia calmly took out a small dark green bottle from the tool belt at her waist and hid it in her palm. This natural actor put on a weak posture, and despite the fear in his heart, he still endured the severe pain and stared at Gino with his eyes. Monster. Gino, who was walking this way, had a disdainful smile on his face. I'm not a monster, I'm a human being. People. Talia's expression was stiff and her face turned dark. Can an ordinary person catch up with him in just a few seconds? You know, the distance between the two is hundreds of meters away. Is this something a human can do? So how do you plan to die? Gino shrugged, with a look of indifference on his face. Will you crush your head or break your neck? I suggest you choose the latter, that way your corpse will look better. At the moment, Gino is like the nagging villain in the anime, but unlike the villain, he is frantically collecting Talia's points, so he will delay as long as he can. He doesn't think this woman can be in his hands. Escape. Choose. Talia's eyes were firm, and she took a deep look at Gino who was standing there, and then she crushed the test tube containing the green potion in her hand. Bang! The green potion exploded, and a subtle sulfur smell filled the air. Gino frowned and looked at Talia. I saw that the woman's injuries were healing rapidly. The originally pale complexion became rosy, and even the aura improved a lot, and the whole person was full of energy. Interesting, a recovery potion. Seeing Talia's state, Gino was not surprised. After all, he is a villain who can score points, and he has some means of self-protection. Just as Gino was thinking, Talia shouted lowly. Ha! The hook around his waist suddenly jumped out like a cold poisonous snake, and the iron claws made of steel stabbed Gino's eyes accurately. It flew towards Gino at an extremely fast speed. It all happened in an instant. Talia didn't believe that the other party could react. However, unexpectedly, a big hand gently grasped the incoming hook. You don't want to use this thing to defeat me, do you? Gino looked disdainful and gently pulled the arm holding the hook inward. Boom! A terrifying force struck, and Talia was pulled by the force and flew backwards towards Gino. Talia's expression changed drastically, and she quickly let go of the rope, falling into the forest in great embarrassment. Bang bang bang! The woman raised her hands to protect her head, and her body could not stop rolling on the ground until it hit a big tree. Negative emotions from Talia +10. If I were you, I would choose to run instead of fight. With a calm expression, Gino walked up to the woman and grabbed Talia's neck. However, it can also be seen from her fighting style that this woman has a strong personality and is very aggressive, but she seems to have never experienced a life and death battle and lacks experience. If it were Batman, he would have chosen to retreat wisely as early as the first time the two fought, and then he would have thoroughly investigated Gino's fighting style and even his strength, and then they would fight again. This is the difference in fighting thinking, and obviously, this young female killer is still too green. The points harvested from this woman have reached 900 points. Very rewarding. Ahem. Talia breathed hard, looking into those cold and ruthless blue eyes. The woman's heart was filled with fear again. Not only is his hearing superb and his speed terrifying, but his reflexes are also top-notch. Facing such an enemy, how on earth should she defeat him? There was a voice in her heart that kept urging her to give up, but soon, Lei Xiaogu's figure appeared in her mind, and that contemptuous and disdainful attitude once again ignited Talia's desire to survive. A flash of determination flashed in Talia's eyes, and then her expression was replaced by a hint of shame and anger. As a qualified member of the Assassin's League, Talia plans to use techniques she knows but has never used. Ahem, Talia said in a hoarse voice. The woman's eyes were full of charm and tenderness at this moment. This sudden change made Gino slightly stunned, and then an expression of interest appeared on his face. Was he planning to seduce him? Interesting. Thinking in his heart, Gino slowly let go of Talia's neck. The woman who lost her center of gravity suddenly fell onto the wet ground. Please begin your performance. Gino smiled and looked down at Talia. Well, he had no other intention. He just wanted to challenge his weakness and improve his willpower towards the temptation of beauty. Talia ignored Gino. She sat down on the grass and raised her pretty little face. Her green eyes were filled with affection. One little hand stretched out her index finger and gently touched her lips, and the other hand gently placed it on her lips. Gino's thighs, and then slowly stood up. His hands were like a pair of small swimming snakes passing over Gino's body. From time to time, they would playfully stop at some sensitive places and slide with jerky skills. That's it, Gino sighed without blushing, your skills are not good. I don't even have my own maid who knows how to flirt. Listening to Gino's sarcasm, Talia's heart was immediately filled with anger. She had never used seduction techniques since she was born, so it was inevitable that she was unfamiliar. But Miss Talia's greatest strength is that she overcomes difficulties. Listening to Gino's sarcasm actually inspired her fighting spirit. The woman gritted her teeth, then raised her straight and round right leg and kicked it suddenly. Snapped. Talia put one foot on Gino's ear and stepped on the tree trunk. The two figures were one behind the other. Gino leaned against the big tree with his back. It looked like he was knocked against the wall by Talia. It's a little interesting this time. Gino smiled and turned to look at the long legs. Even though he had countless legs, these legs were the longest and straightest he had ever seen. Gino stared at those green eyes, his right hand cooperatively clasped the long, round leg without a trace of fat, and then explored all the way down. Well, the femme fatale's eyes flashed with panic, but she quickly calmed down. Talia endured the strange feeling that reverberated in her heart like an electric current, stretched out her tongue and licked her red lips. She gently approached Gino. The distance between them was getting closer and closer, so much that you can hear each other's breathing. With steady and gentle breathing intertwined with slightly rapid breathing, Talia opened her red lips slightly and whispered in an ambiguous tone, "Believe me, I can do a lot of things." "Then use it." Gino tilted his head and stared into Talia's eyes. The two guys had their own thoughts, which made them even more ambiguous in the silent night. Under the quiet woods, a man and a woman leaning against a big tree look like a couple stealing their feelings. The moonlight seems to be their audience, dispelling the darkness for them, as if some scene that readers would like to see will happen next second. But, although my mouth was very high, but Talia didn't know what to do next. She joined the Assassin's League for training at the age of 4 and completed all training until she was 20. She had nothing else to do in her life other than training to become a qualified member of the organization. As for falling in love, in a word, her father is Lei Xiaogu, the great assassin leader. The guys in the alliance wanted to take a detour when they saw her. But when she met Gino's playful gaze, the woman's heart skipped a beat, and she slowly put her red lips on her like in those vulgar idol dramas. She had to paralyze the guy in front of her to prepare for the next move. Well, Talia used her jerky kissing skills, resisting the hands that wandered around her body, opening her eyes just a slit, and when she saw Gino with his eyes tightly closed, the woman sneered in her heart. After all, he is still an 18-year-old kid who can't move around women. In one sentence, he is still too young. With this thought in her heart, Talia quietly took out her right hand and gently took off the hairpin on her head. Her advantage is not so easy to take advantage of. And now, it's time for Gino to pay the price. Aha! Talia waved a green hairpin, like a green lightning piercing Gino's eyes. A flash of hatred flashed in the woman's eyes. As the weakest tissue in the human body, she didn't believe it couldn't be pierced. You must know that this hairpin is made of the rare and precious promethium metal. Because of its scarcity in the Assassin League's inventory, Talia still sneaked in and stole a piece of it to create the current hairpin. Snapped. The sharp hairpin suddenly pierced Gino's eyes. Ah! The other party seemed to be in great pain. He pushed Talia away suddenly, covered his cheek as if he was hurt, and let out a painful cry. "My eyes, woman, what did you do to me?" Seeing Gino kneeling on the ground as if he was hurt, Talia felt a sense of joy on her face. The woman was overjoyed. It really works. Suppressing the excitement in her heart, Talia wiped the liquid from the corner of her mouth, straightened her waist again and resumed her aloof style. Her long hair, unbound by the hairpin, was like a waterfall. Talia crossed her arms and slowly walked towards Gino like a noble queen. Snort. Talia snorted coldly and stared at Gino with disgust, remembering that he touched and pinched her body. A strange feeling appeared in her body again. Talia pursed her lips to suppress the heat in her heart, sneered, raised her slender left leg and stepped on Gino's shoulder, condescendingly saying like a noble queen, "Do you know where you went wrong? Brat. What did I do wrong?" Gino seemed to be in pain and asked with a trembling voice. "You shouldn't talk so much to women." Talia's face was gloomy, her green eyes stared at Gino, while twisting her left leg and stepping on Gino's shoulder. "But the feeling on my feet was so bad, it felt like I was stepping on a piece of steel. Now, you can die." Talia held the hairpin and gestured towards Gino's head, as if she was considering where to start to relieve her hatred. "But before that, can you tell me why you want that stone?" Talia leaned down, and when she thought that everything that happened today was because of that stone, her heart was as eager as a cat's scratch to know the truth. She was so curious. That stone. Gino, who lowered his head, had a low voice. Talia couldn't clearly see Gino's expression, and couldn't hear what the guy was mumbling. She frowned slightly, and while wary of the other party's sudden outburst, she leaned down slightly and wondered, what happened to that stone? Gino covered his face and said slowly, "The secret of that stone." The next second, just when Talia was listening to Gino's words attentively, the boy suddenly raised his head. The long blonde hair fluttered, revealing a handsome side face, and as Gino took off his hands covering his face, an intact cheek broke into Talia's field of vision. That indifferent smile and cold eyes immediately made Talia freeze in place as if struck by lightning. Abba. Talia couldn't describe her current mood. Shock, surprise, disbelief. Gino's eye socket that should have been poked out was intact, not even leaving a red mark. And when Talia saw the joking smile on Gino's face as he slowly stood up, the woman reacted immediately, and the surprise in her heart was instantly ignited and turned into blazing extreme anger. This guy is actually playing with himself. Negative emotions from Talia. +100, +100. A series of system reports sounded in Gino's mind. Gino stood up like a devil with a bad attitude. He stared at Talia, whose chest was heaving violently, and sneered, "You look very angry, don't you? You devil." Talia said these words from between her teeth. It was obvious that her hatred for Gino now reached the point of gnashing her teeth. "I want you to die." Talia's defense was completely broken. She was so angry that she waved the hairpin in her hand and rushed towards Gino without any plan, intending to stab the hairpin into Gino's throat. "Maybe you should learn to respect the strong." Gino returned to his expressionless expression, raised his arm and slapped Talia on the face as she rushed towards him. Snapped. The crisp sound echoed in the dense forest, and Talia's broken kite fell in the cold dense forest. Puff. The woman opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, as deeper despair and fear grew in her heart. The woman stared blankly at the blood-stained soil. The brain is racing. Terrifying strength, unparalleled speed, and now he has an indestructible body. She couldn't imagine how she could defeat this monster. For the first time, a ridiculous idea came to Talia's mind. Can her father, the leader of the Assassin's League, the great and all-powerful Lei Xiaogu, the owner of the Salu Pond, be able to defeat this humanoid monster? Gino didn't know what Talia was thinking at the moment. He was standing there enjoying the sudden increase in points. After slapping this woman, he gained another 1,000 points in just a few minutes. This transaction was not a loss. While thinking about it, Gino slowly walked towards Talia, planning to slap her a few more times to humiliate her. What? Gentlemanly manners, what the hell is that? He, Gino Luther, is a Sigma man who will not be played around by women. Not far away at this moment, the moonlight interweaves with the trees and casts mottled leaf shadows. Under the flickering moonlight, Talia's beautiful face was slightly swollen, her long hair was messy and spread on her cheeks, and her green eyes were full of panic, watching the figure getting closer and closer. Mistakenly thinking that Gino was going to kill her, Talia no longer cared about the so-called grace and the glory of the Assassin League. She screamed, looked at Gino in a panic, supported her body with both hands and kept retreating. "Don't kill me. I am Lei Xiaogu's daughter, the next successor of the Assassin's League. I can serve you." Snapped. The figure who originally walked towards Talia stood slowly on the spot. Gino's blue eyes stared at Talia quietly, with a half-smile expression on his face. "Serve me." In the dense forest, Gino stood in front of Talia thoughtfully. He always felt that the name Talia was familiar, but there were so many superheroes in the DC universe that it was normal for some people to have trouble remembering it. However, after learning that Talia was Lei Xiaogu's daughter, memories of death began to attack Gino's mind. Speaking of Talia, most people may not be familiar with it, but her son is famous, Damien. Batman's fifth-generation Robin, Bruce Wayne's son, and DC's grandson. Gino didn't care about this, he only felt that Talia's identity was very useful. As a behemoth in the underground world, the League of Assassins ranks among the best on Earth in terms of intelligence-gathering capabilities and strength. Gino remembered that in the comics he had read, Lei Xiaogu led the League of Assassins to invade Gotham City, Batman's hometown, more than once. This can also prove the strength of this organization from the side. But what Gino cares about most is the intelligence capabilities of the Assassin League. He can definitely use the intelligence capabilities of this underground organization to find some supervillains who come to violently harvest points. Therefore, if you control Talia, it is equivalent to having the Assassin League's intelligence network, but the prerequisite is that she must be obedient. Gino stared at Talia with some trepidation. This woman is not a peaceful person. She is ambitious and wants to overthrow her father and prove herself. She is a perfect example of a filial daughter. Backstabbing is Talia's specialty. Therefore, if you want this woman to work for him honestly, you must have her handle to better control her. It's like a wild horse. Only by putting a muzzle on it, putting on a bit, holding its reins, and whipping it with a whip can you make the horse face the left but not the right. This is different from the poor middle-aged man. Young people have different approaches but similar approaches, but I'm afraid you won't be restrained and will be unscrupulous. So, how can we control her and make this woman extinguish the little thoughts in her heart? Gino's eyes swept over Talia's curvy figure. The night clothes were in tatters, revealing the beautiful scenery inside. Gino raised his eyebrows, and a plan was brewing in his mind. It's not impossible to survive, but I have a condition. Gino said calmly. What conditions? Talia breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that her life was saved tonight. It's very simple. In order to ensure your loyalty, I need some handle. Gino let out a breath and said leisurely under Talia's frightened eyes, a killer, you should have a camera, right? Camera. Talia clenched her fists and looked at Gino's deep eyes, feeling an ominous premonition well up in her heart. Gino's expression was calm, but his tone was unquestionable. Answer me. Talia gritted her teeth and replied, yes, there is one in my car. It was intended to be used to record the completion of the mission. Very well, take me there. At midnight, a figure leaned against a Wrangler off-road vehicle. Shashasha. Talia put on her clothes. The cold wind blew across her smooth ankles, and her eyes stared maliciously at the tall figure not far away. Gino played with the camera, admiring his masterpiece with a smile on his lips. Ignoring Talia's gaze, Gino shook the camera in his hand, smiled lightly at Talia and said, you have a really good figure. Hee. Talia was so angry at Gino's shamelessness that she laughed out loud. She didn't expect that the other party actually asked her to stay. Although it was shameless, Talia had to admit that this trick really worked. The little thoughts she shouldn't have were temporarily extinguished in her heart. If her photos were really spread all over the world, she would be willing to die. The more arrogant a person is, the prouder they are in their heart, let alone Talia who wants to prove herself. So, Gino slowly approached Talia, leaned down and spoke quietly in the woman's ear, Miss Talia, work for me honestly and diligently. I don't want your photos to be spread all over the world. I believe many people will enjoy seeing the photo of the daughter of the leader of the League of Assassins. Shameless. Is that useful? Useful. Call. Talia took a deep breath to suppress the anger in her heart. She raised her head and took a deep look at Gino, and almost gritted her teeth and replied, I will serve you. Also, you are the most shameless man I have ever seen. Now she has no choice. Just for the position of leader of the Assassin League, Talia can only choose to surrender. Otherwise, if the photos were exposed, she believed that old guy Lei Xiaogu would kill her without hesitation to rectify his reputation. Thanks for the compliment. Gino didn't care about Talia's evaluation. This wave is a win-win, it's a win. Not only did he block Talia's mouth, but he also drove a nail into the Assassin's League. Although the method is shameless, it achieves the goal. In the adult world, there is no right or wrong, only the results. Snort. Talia turned her head, not wanting to see Gino's disgusting face. Cooperation achieved. Gino didn't pay attention to Talia's attitude, straightened his body, stretched out his big hand to clasp Talia's wrist, and pulled the woman up without any explanation. I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation. Well, the kind that will ruin your reputation if you are unhappy. When Gino returned to the castle, the sky was already hazy and white. Talia drove away. Judging from the way she wanted to step on the accelerator, the woman was in a bad mood at the time. Gino looked at the ancient castle in the distance. In the slightly dark sky, a little sunshine dispels the darkness. It's been a long night, Gino thought in his heart and walked towards the castle. Outside the castle, Lex, wearing pajamas, stood in front of the iron gate with an expressionless face. Gino slowly walked towards Lex. He could see that his brother's shoulders relaxed when he saw him, as if he was relieved. He's worried about himself. This thought passed through his heart, and Gino felt warm in his heart. Lex. Gino returned to his normal appearance and greeted Lex with a smile. As the matter resolved, Lex glanced at the camera in Gino's hand, thought for a while and didn't ask anything. He believed that his brother could solve these problems perfectly. It's solved. Have you been waiting for a long time? Gino smiled and put his arm around Lex's shoulders. He smiled and walked toward the castle while holding his brother's shoulder. In the castle at this moment, many servants were busy cleaning the messy grass from last night. Whether it's a big hole in the castle wall or a disfigured grassland, these require servants to fill in and repair them. As the two of them walked along, Gino could be keenly aware of the changes in the attitudes of the servants around him. In the past respect, their attitude towards themselves was a little more fearful. Originating from the fear of that inhuman power. Lex glanced at his brother with some worry. Gino, don't think so much, go and rest quickly. The housekeeper has prepared a new room for you to rest on the second floor. Gino shook his head. I'm not sleepy, you go to bed first. The two walked into the living room. Gino let go of Lex and pointed to the bags under his eyes. You already have dark circles under your eyes. You can't find a suitable lady to marry if you are so ugly. Lex's face turned dark, and the brat made fun of himself again. However, after waiting all night, I was indeed feeling sleepy. Lex resisted the urge to doze off and walked towards his room. But just when Lex's figure was about to disappear around the corner of the second floor, Gino stopped him. Lex. Lex turned his head and looked at Gino on the first floor in confusion. What's wrong? The blonde boy smiled brightly, stared at Lex with his big blue eyes, and said seriously, thank you. Lex smiled lightly, shrugged and said, we're brothers, aren't we? Gino also smiled, very happily, yes, we're brothers. At the same time that Gino returned to his own castle, which occupied a huge area and was served by countless servants. In the deserted woods, a short figure faintly woke up. My head. Gray clutched his neck in pain and stood up. After a brief brain shutdown, Gray's pimpled face was filled with panic. Why did I faint? Where's my camera? Gray rubbed his sore eyes and looked around, but couldn't find his camera. Where did it go? Gray was in a state of confusion. If the things in the camera were seen by others, he would definitely go to jail and be filled with ink by the black uncles. Deep down, he wanted to find the camera urgently, but the bright sky above interrupted Gray's thoughts. A flash of panic flashed across his face. I slept all night and that old woman is going to curse me to death. My heart was in turmoil, and my fear for my mother outweighed the thought of looking for the camera. Gray hurriedly picked up his backpack and ran towards the depths of the jungle. Parting through the dense bushes, he rushed out of the woods towards a familiar trail and found his little green beetle on the dirt road. Buzz. Gray started the car and drove the old car towards home. Gotcha. The white wooden door was gently pushed open. Gray slowly pushed the door open and carefully poked his head out. Through his reflective glasses, Gray saw his mother sitting on the sofa in the living room. The TV in the living room was playing a clip of Lana laughing with her boyfriend. Bang! Hearing the movement behind him, Gray's mother, a middle-aged woman with a slightly plump figure, had a cold face and stared at Gray, who was hiding in the corner with eyes full of anger. Is this how you usually spend your time? Secretly filming a girl without her permission? Seeing that his family's secret was exposed, Gray rushed forward in anger, snatched the tape from his mother's hand, and roared at his mother, "You have no right to enter my room. Are you worthy of talking to me about your qualifications? Gray's mother stared. Lana's aunt and I are even friends. How can I face her if you do such a thing? That's between you two. Gray kicked the tape into his backpack in a panic. You disgust me, Gray. The woman stared indifferently at the son she had raised with her own hands, and asked, answer me, if you didn't come back tonight, did you go secretly photograph Lana? No. Gray took a deep breath and turned to look at his mother. I'm just collecting insects tonight. The woman sneered, her eyes full of disgust. Another disgusting habit, being interested in those bugs. Bugs are not disgusting, Gray roared in response, as if his loud voice meant he was being reasonable. Whatever. Gray's mother took a deep breath, suppressed the disappointment and anger in her heart towards her son, and said in a cold tone, I will send you to a training school tomorrow, and those bugs you keep in the house will also disappear in my eyes. When he heard that the old woman was going to send him to a military training base, Gray's expression remained unchanged, but when he heard that the woman was going to kill his bugs, Gray's face showed panic. My bug. Gray watched as the woman walked into the room to contact the school director. Who will take care of his precious bugs after he is gone? Ding dang dang. Gray rushed into his room on the second floor like a gust of wind. Push the door open. The first thing you see is a room full of glass cabinets. In the glass cabinet, countless strange-shaped insects flapped their wings and squirmed. They are so beautiful. Gray was obsessed with looking at these bugs. He came to a glass box and stared at the crickets inside. A few green stones mixed in the moist soil hit the outside of the glass box. I have to send them away, these cute little elves. Gray's eyes were dark. He picked up a few cans and came to the window to stare at his car. Buzz. Old cars make a coo-soo sound. Gray, who was wearing glasses, had one hand on the steering wheel and the other hand holding a jar. Don't worry, little ones, I'll get you to a safe place. Gray lowered his head and murmured. When he raised his head, a sharp curve appeared not far away. Shet. The man cursed angrily, holding his hands and swiping the direction, causing the car to twist and turn. Bang. The glass jar that lost its support smashed against the car door and shattered. Oh. Several insects with green light broke free from their restraints, flapping their wings and jumping up and down in the car. From time to time, some insects bite Gray with their mouthparts. Don't do this. Gray wailed in horror. These insects kept jumping and flying, and their dense numbers blocked Gray's sight, making it difficult for him to see the road clearly. No. In the dark night sky, accompanied by a scream of terror, the beetle suddenly hit the field dam crookedly. Bang. As black smoke rose, green light flashed inside the beetle. Weekend. Gino was woken up by the maids. What time is it? Gino rubbed his eyes, took a sip of the milk handed by the maid. 12 o'clock, young master. The maid replied respectfully, while saying, your classmates are here to see you. You told the steward before to let them enter the castle when they come to see you. They're waiting in the lobby now. Classmate. Gino raised his eyebrows, pulled back the quilt out of curiosity, and stepped out of bed with his slippers on. Who is it? Clark, or Chloe and the others? Gino yawned and walked down the second floor wearing a pajamas. In the hall, the trio sat on the sofa. Good morning, everyone. Gino glanced at Clark and Black Pete. The two bad guys had their legs together, looking like they didn't know where to put their eyes. Don't blame them for not being determined, it's just that the maid in the manor is too tempting. Morning, Gino. Chloe stood up with a smile, waved her hand to greet Gino, and twisted slightly on the spot, causing the blue pleated skirt to spin accordingly. The girl raised her eyebrows and winked at Gino. Does it look good? Not bad. Gino shrugged, smiled and patted Chloe's shoulder, then turned to look at Clark and the other two. Have you had breakfast? Clark nodded and replied, I have eaten, but have you done your homework? Homework. Gino was slightly stunned, a little confused. What homework? Ah, biology homework. Xiaohei Probe picked up the conversation. Each of us needs to capture an insect to make a specimen. I wanted to ask if you can come. Catch bugs. Gino was a little uninterested. He had no interest in insects. Yeah, catch bugs. Chloe looked forward to Gino. Want to come together? Gino originally planned to refuse. But he glanced at Clark, who had a dull look on his face, and a smile appeared in his eyes. Of course, I am willing to go. He wanted to know why Clark was unhappy today. It's been 2 days, and the relationship between Clark and Jonathan should have softened a bit, so who is making Clark unhappy? Detective Falcone is officially launched. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.